Have you ever heard a rumor so unbelievable that you laughed it off, only to discover later that every single word was true? Well, that's exactly what happened in the quiet, tree-lined streets of Aspen Ridge, Colorado. For weeks, people whispered behind coffee shop counters, beauty salons, hospital hallways, and luxury hotel lobbies. Did you hear about Grayson Bennett's wife? They say she woke up one morning and had no idea who her own husband was. No, that's not even the craziest part. What could possibly be crazier than forgetting your husband? They say she didn't even remember the wedding. Impossible. Oh, it gets worse. They found her wearing a $10 million wedding ring, sleeping in the billionaire's bed, surrounded by hundreds of wedding photos, and she screamed for security because she thought he'd kidnapped her. Most people dismissed the story as another exaggerated piece of celebrity gossip. After all, billionaires were always surrounded by outrageous headlines. But this wasn't a scandal, it wasn't a publicity stunt, and it certainly wasn't the fairy tale the tabloids tried to sell. Because the truth behind that morning would leave an entire city questioning whether love is something we remember, or something we choose. Before we begin today's unforgettable story, welcome to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, the home of powerful love stories filled with real emotions, meaningful life lessons, and unforgettable moments that stay with you long after the story ends. If you're new here, we'd love to have you join our growing family. Take a second to subscribe, turn on notifications, and become part of a community that believes every great love story has something valuable to teach us. And while you're watching, let us know where you're watching from. I always enjoy seeing our amazing viewers from across America and around the world. Now, let me ask you something. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning in a beautiful mansion. You open your eyes to find an expensive diamond ring on your finger. Wedding photographs cover every wall. Everyone around you insists you've been happily married for nearly 2 years. But you don't recognize your spouse. You don't remember saying, "I do." You don't remember falling in love. Would you trust the person claiming to be your husband? Or would you believe you'd become the victim of an elaborate lie? Take a moment and share your answer in the comments before we begin. There are no right or wrong answers, and I'd love to hear what you think. Now, settle in, because this isn't just a story about memory loss. It's a story about trust when memories disappear. It's a story about choosing love without certainty. It's a story about discovering that sometimes the strongest relationships aren't built on unforgettable moments, but on the quiet decisions two people make every single day. And by the time this story ends, you may never look at love, marriage, forgiveness, or second chances the same way again. Let's begin. Zariah Carter had always believed that every morning started the same way. You opened your eyes. You remembered who you were. And life simply continued from where it had left off the night before. She was about to discover just how fragile that certainty really was. The first thing Zariah Carter noticed was the silence. Not the comforting silence of dawn before a busy day at the hospital, but the unsettling kind. The kind that made every heartbeat sound too loud. Her eyelids felt heavy. A dull ache pulsed behind her temples as she slowly opened her eyes. An unfamiliar ceiling stretched above her, decorated with elegant wooden beams and a crystal chandelier that caught the early morning sunlight. The room was enormous, easily 3 times the size of her apartment bedroom. She frowned. Where am I? She pushed herself upright, immediately regretting it, as a sharp pain shot through her head. Ah. She pressed trembling fingers against her forehead. The room slowly came into focus. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked snow-covered mountains. A marble fireplace occupied one wall, while fresh white lilies filled a crystal vase on a nearby table. Every piece of furniture looked custom-made, tasteful, without being flashy. Nothing about the room looked familiar. Her breathing became uneven. I don't. She searched her memory. The last thing she remembered was finishing a grueling overnight shift at Mercy General Hospital. She had changed out of her scrubs, hugged her co-worker Jasmine goodbye, and walked toward the employee parking garage while thinking about finally getting a full night's sleep. After that, nothing. Her thoughts came to an abrupt halt when something sparkled on her left hand. A diamond. No, not just a diamond. A breathtaking engagement ring paired with an elegant platinum wedding band. The stones caught the sunlight, scattering tiny rainbows across the comforter. Her eyes widened. What? She turned her hand over several times, convinced she had to be dreaming. She wasn't engaged. She certainly wasn't married. Slowly, almost afraid of what she might discover, she slipped out of the oversized white shirt she was wearing just enough to examine herself. No balium injuries, no restraints, no signs of violence. But the shirt clearly wasn't hers. It was much too large, smelling faintly of cedarwood and expensive cologne. Her pulse quickened. She swung her legs over the side of the bed. The polished hardwood floor felt cold beneath her feet. She needed answers. Immediately. As she stood, dizziness forced her to steady herself against the bedside table. That was when she noticed the photograph. Her fingers froze. The silver frame held a wedding picture. A bride. A groom. The bride was her. She stared in disbelief. She wore an elegant ivory gown with delicate lace sleeves. Joy radiated from her smile. Genuine, effortless joy. Beside her stood a tall man in a charcoal tuxedo. His blue eyes never left her face. His expression wasn't one of pride or possession. It was love. Pure, quiet, unmistakable. Zariah's heart pounded. No. She grabbed the frame. There had to be some mistake. She turned toward the dresser. Another photograph. This time, they were hiking in autumn, laughing together beneath golden trees. Another, Christmas morning. Another, on a sailboat. Another, celebrating what appeared to be their first wedding anniversary. Every photograph told the same story. They weren't strangers. They looked like two people deeply in love. Yet she couldn't remember a single moment. Her breathing became shallow. This isn't real. She hurried toward the bedroom door. As she stepped into the hallway, her confusion only deepened. The house was breathtaking. Modern architecture blended with warm natural wood. Family photographs lined the walls, and fresh flowers decorated nearly every corner. It didn't feel like a billionaire's cold mansion. It felt lived in, loved. She walked cautiously downstairs. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifted from somewhere nearby. Then she heard footsteps. Her body stiffened. A tall man rounded the corner, carrying 2 coffee mugs. The moment he saw her, everything in his face changed. Relief, disbelief, hope. His shoulders sagged as though an unbearable weight had finally been lifted. Zariah. His voice cracked. You're awake. He placed the mugs on the kitchen island without taking his eyes off her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Tears gathered in his eyes. He smiled, a small, grateful smile that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. You scared me. He took one cautious step forward. She instinctively stepped back. Don't. The single word stopped him instantly. His smile faded. Who are you? She whispered. The color drained from his face. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Finally, after what felt like forever, he answered quietly. I'm Grayson. She waited. Nothing. He seemed to realize she expected more. I'm your husband. The words struck her like a physical blow. No. His jaw tightened. Zariah. No, she shouted, backing farther away. You're lying. I'm not. I've never seen you before. His expression crumbled, not with anger, with heartbreak. She grabbed the nearest ceramic vase and held it between them like a weapon. Stay away from me. He immediately lifted both hands. I'm not going to hurt you. I don't even know who you are. I know. You broke into my life. No. You kidnapped me. I didn't. Her breathing became frantic. Then explain this. She held up her left hand, the diamond flashing between them. Why am I wearing this? Grayson stared at the ring for several long seconds. When he finally looked back at her, tears had begun slipping silently down his face. Because... Oh, he whispered. You asked me never to take it off. The sincerity in his voice only frightened her more. No. She shook her head violently. I would remember getting married. I know. I would remember loving someone. I know. So stop pretending. I'm not pretending. She glanced toward the front entrance. Could she make it? Could she outrun him? As though reading her thoughts, Grayson slowly stepped aside, leaving a clear path to the front door. You can leave if that's what you want. She blinked. You. I won't stop you. He reached into his pocket, removed a key fob, and gently placed it on the kitchen island. Your car is in the garage. His voice remained calm despite the pain written across his face. If you don't feel safe driving, I'll call someone you trust. She stared at him, unable to reconcile the monster she had imagined with the man standing before her. Most kidnappers didn't offer their victims the car keys. Most liars didn't look as though their own hearts were breaking. Before she could respond, another wave of dizziness crashed over her. The room spun violently. Her knees buckled. Grayson moved instinctively, catching her before she hit the floor. For one brief second, she found herself in his arms. Strong, steady, unexpectedly familiar. A strange warmth flickered through her chest. So quickly, she almost imagined it. Then darkness swallowed everything. When she opened her eyes again, distant sirens echoed outside the house. Paramedics rushed through the front door carrying medical equipment. One of them knelt beside her. Ma'am, can you tell me your name? She swallowed hard. Zariah Carter. Do you know what day it is? She answered without hesitation. March 12th. The paramedic exchanged a worried glance with another medic. Then he looked at Grayson. Grayson's face turned pale. He slowly lowered his eyes before speaking the words that would change Zariah's life forever. It's not March 12th anymore. The paramedic checked his tablet, then looked back at her with gentle concern. Ms. Carter. He paused carefully. Today is January 8th. Almost 2 years later. The room fell silent. Zariah stared at him, convinced she had misheard. Almost 2 years? That was impossible. Yet every face around her wore the same expression. Not confusion, not deception, only concern. And for the first time since waking up, a terrifying thought crept into her mind. What if everyone else was telling the truth? And the only person she could no longer trust was her own memory. That, the neurologist said softly, is something we're going to help you discover, one day at a time. The room fell into a heavy silence. No one rushed to fill it. The steady hum of medical equipment became the only sound as Zariah Carter stared blankly at the white hospital blanket covering her legs. One day at a time. The phrase sounded simple enough, but how could anyone recover nearly 2 years of life one day at a time? She wasn't missing a weekend getaway. She wasn't missing a forgotten birthday or an old vacation. She was missing an entire chapter of her existence. Nearly 22 months had vanished as though someone had carefully cut them from the pages of her life. Somewhere inside those missing months, she had apparently met a man, fallen in love, planned a wedding, spoken vows, built a home, created memories, dreamed about a future, and somehow forgotten every single moment. Her chest tightened until breathing became difficult. I don't understand. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I remember graduating nursing school. She swallowed hard. I remember my first day working at Mercy General. I remember my grandmother teaching me how to bake peach cobbler when I was 15. A tear slid down her cheek. I even remember the ugly green couch in my first apartment. She looked helplessly at the neurologist. So, how can I remember things from years ago? But, not my own husband? The neurologist pulled his chair closer, speaking with the calm patience of someone who had answered similar questions many times before. Our memories aren't stored like books on a shelf. They're connected through countless pathways in the brain. When trauma occurs, those pathways can sometimes become disrupted. So, the memories are gone? Not necessarily. His answer offered a sliver of hope. In many cases, the memories still exist. They've simply become inaccessible, like trying to open a locked room without the key. Zariah lowered her eyes. And if the door never opens? The doctor hesitated. Then you build new memories. The words settled heavily over the room. Build new memories. To everyone else, it sounded hopeful. To Zariah, it sounded like being told to build a new home while the old one burned to the ground. She turned toward the window. Outside, snow drifted gently across the hospital parking lot. Cars came and went. People hurried through the cold carrying coffee cups and backpacks. Life continued, completely unaware that hers had stopped. She wondered how many ordinary mornings she had taken for granted. How many times she had woken up believing memory was guaranteed. How many times she had assumed tomorrow would always feel connected to yesterday. She would never make that assumption again. Dr. Harper quietly closed the medical file resting on her lap. The good news is that all of your scans look encouraging. There is no evidence of new bleeding. No bellium swelling. No signs of permanent structural damage. So why can't I remember? Because the brain is incredibly complex. She offered a reassuring smile. We can treat broken bones with casts. We can repair damaged hearts with surgery. But memories. She paused. Heal on their own timetable. Zariah nodded slowly, though the explanation offered little comfort. Her gaze drifted toward Grayson. He remained exactly where he had stood for the past several minutes, near the window, hands loosely folded in front of him, far enough away that she wouldn't feel cornered. He hadn't interrupted the doctors. He hadn't tried convincing her of anything. He hadn't even attempted to hold her hand. There was something strangely respectful about the distance he kept, as though he understood that every step toward her now had to be earned all over again. It made her curious. If he truly was the arrogant billionaire the magazines often described, why wasn't he demanding answers? Why wasn't he insisting she come home? Why wasn't he angry? Instead, he looked like a man carrying a grief too heavy for words. The silence stretched until a soft knock echoed against the hospital room door. Everyone turned. A nurse peeked inside. Dr. Harper? Yes? "There's someone asking to see Ms. Carter." Zariah frowned. "Who is it?" The nurse smiled gently. "She says she's your best friend." For the first time since waking up in the mansion, uncertainty gave way to something else. Hope. If anyone could tell her the truth, if anyone could explain the missing months without emotion clouding the facts, it would be someone who had known her long before Grayson Bennett ever entered her life. Dr. Harper looked towards Zariah. "It's entirely your decision." Zariah took a slow breath, then nodded. "I'd like to see her." The nurse disappeared. A few moments later, footsteps approached the room. Quick, unsteady, almost as though the person walking was trying very hard not to run. Then the door opened. A young black woman wearing navy blue scrubs stepped inside. Her eyes immediately found Zariah. For a heartbeat, she simply stood there. Then tears welled in her eyes. "Oh, Z. Oh." Her voice cracked so deeply that it barely sounded like words. "You scared us to death." Zariah searched the woman's face. Kind eyes, warm smile, familiar, yet painfully unfamiliar at the same time. She wished she recognized her. She wished she recognized anyone. Instead, she could only offer an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry." The woman stopped in her tracks. Not because of the apology, because she instantly understood what it meant. "You, oh." Her smile trembled. "You don't remember me either, do you?" Before we continue to Chapter 2, let's pause for a moment. Imagine waking up to discover you've lost nearly 2 years of your life, and the person standing before you claims to be your husband, yet you don't recognize his face or remember loving him. What would you do? Would you trust him and try to rebuild your life together, or would you walk away until you uncovered the truth for yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read them all, and I'd love to hear what you would choose. If this story has already touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter. Because in Chapter 2, Zariah begins uncovering the life she lost. And what she discovers about Grayson Bennett will challenge everything she believes about love, trust, and second chances. I'll see you in the next chapter. The morning sunlight spilled through the hospital window, but Zariah Carter couldn't appreciate its warmth. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she hoped she would wake up in her tiny apartment after another exhausting shift at Mercy General Hospital. Instead, every morning brought her back to the same reality. The wedding ring still rested on her finger. The doctors still insisted she had lost nearly 2 years of memories. And Grayson Bennett, he was still her husband, even if he felt like a complete stranger. She slowly turned the ring around her finger. The platinum band was cool against her skin, and the diamond caught the sunlight in brilliant flashes. It was undeniably beautiful, yet it felt heavier than any piece of jewelry she'd ever worn. It wasn't the weight of the gold. It was the weight of everything it represented. Promises she couldn't remember making. A future she couldn't remember planning. A man she couldn't remember loving. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Harper entered with a warm smile and a clipboard tucked beneath her arm. "Good morning, Zariah." "Morning. How are you feeling?" Zariah gave a faint laugh. "Do you want the polite answer or the honest one?" "The honest one." "I feel like I'm living someone else's life." Dr. Harper nodded. "That's a very common feeling after traumatic memory loss." She pulled up a chair beside the bed. "I want to remind you of something before your discharge today." Zariah looked up. "You don't owe anyone instant trust." Relief washed over her face. "You also don't owe anyone instant forgiveness, instant affection, or instant certainty." She continued gently. "Right now, your priority isn't becoming the wife everyone remembers. It's becoming yourself again." Those words settled deep inside Zariah. For the first time since waking in Grayson's mansion, she felt someone understood the fear she couldn't put into words. What if the person I become isn't the woman he married? Dr. Harper smiled kindly. "Then both of you will have a choice to make." The answer lingered in the room long after the doctor stood to leave. Life wasn't asking Zariah to remember. It was asking her to choose. That thought frightened her almost as much as the missing memories themselves. An hour later, the discharge papers were signed. Jasmine stood beside the bed, helping Zariah gather the few belongings the hospital had returned to her. Her phone, a small purse, a set of keys. Everything looked familiar, yet strangely distant. Jasmine handed her the phone. "You'll probably find a lot of answers in here." Zariah pressed the power button. The screen lit up. A photograph immediately appeared. She froze. It was her and Grayson, not at a glamorous charity gala, not on a luxury yacht. They were standing in a grocery store wearing jeans and hoodies. Grayson held 2 cartons of ice cream, while Zariah laughed so hard she was leaning against the shopping cart. The picture wasn't posed. Someone had clearly captured an ordinary moment. And somehow, that ordinary moment felt more intimate than any wedding portrait. She quickly locked the phone again. I can't. You don't have to look through everything today, Jasmine said gently. Take your time. Outside the room, Grayson waited quietly. He hadn't come inside. He hadn't interrupted. He simply stood in the hallway, giving her space. As soon as he saw her walking toward him, he straightened. You look better. I feel less dizzy. I'm glad. Silence followed. An awkward silence neither of them seemed to know how to fill. Finally Grayson spoke. The doctors said you shouldn't be alone for the next few days. She immediately stiffened. I'm not going back to the mansion. I know. You do? I heard you tell Dr. Harper. He nodded once. I understand. She had expected an argument. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a key. Your apartment. She blinked. My apartment? You kept it. I did? You said you couldn't bear to give it up because it reminded you of your grandmother. Another memory she didn't have. I've been paying the rent since the wedding. She stared at him. You've been paying for an apartment I don't even live in? He shrugged lightly. You loved that place. I thought one day you might want to visit it again. His answer caught her completely off guard. Most people would have insisted she move into the mansion after the wedding. Instead, he had quietly preserved a place that mattered to her. Not because it benefited him, because it mattered to her. That realization unsettled her in an entirely different way. Kindness was harder to distrust than charm. You can stay there as long as you want, Grayson continued. I've already stocked the refrigerator. She frowned. You went into my apartment? Only after asking Jasmine. Jasmine nodded immediately. I gave him permission. He never touched your personal things, Jasmine added. He only replaced the groceries because everything had expired. Zariah looked at Grayson again. Why would you do that? His answer came without hesitation. Because I didn't know what you'd need when you woke up. For a long moment, she didn't know what to say. She still couldn't remember him. She still wasn't ready to trust him. But every action she had witnessed since waking up painted a picture completely different from the ruthless billionaire the media loved to describe. As they walked toward the hospital entrance, photographers suddenly rushed toward the building. Camera flashes exploded through the glass doors. There they are. Mr. Bennett, is it true your wife doesn't remember you? Mrs. Bennett, did you fake your memory loss? Were you two planning a divorce before the accident? The questions came like bullets. Zariah instinctively stepped backward. Her breathing quickened. She had never imagined becoming the center of a media storm. Without a word, Grayson moved in front of her. Not dramatically, not possessively, simply enough to block the cameras from crowding her. He removed his suit jacket and draped it gently over her shoulders to shield her face from the flashing lights. Then he looked directly at the reporters. My wife is a patient recovering from a medical emergency. His voice remained calm, but firm. She deserves the same privacy and dignity you would want for your own family. No shouting, no threats, no insults. Just quiet conviction. The reporters hesitated. For the first time since meeting him, Zariah found herself wondering a question she hadn't expected. If this was the man Grayson truly was, then who had she fallen in love with during those missing 22 months? And more importantly, could she ever become that woman again? The drive across the city was almost unbearably quiet. Grayson insisted on following behind Jasmine's car, rather than driving Zariah himself. He didn't argue when she chose to ride with her best friend instead. He simply nodded, wished her a safe drive, and promised to stay far enough back that she wouldn't feel watched. That small gesture stayed with Zariah the entire trip. She had spent the last 24 hours expecting him to behave like the powerful billionaire the media portrayed, a man accustomed to getting whatever he wanted. Instead, every decision he made seemed to say the same thing. You are free. Jasmine glanced at her as they waited at a red light. You've been awfully quiet. I don't know what to think. You don't have to figure everything out today. I feel guilty. Jasmine frowned. Guilty? For hurting someone I don't even remember. Jasmine reached over and squeezed her hand. You didn't choose this, Z. I know, but he's looking at me like he lost someone. She stared out the window. And I don't even know who that someone is. 10 minutes later, Jasmine pulled into the parking lot of a modest brick apartment building on the east side of Denver. It looked exactly the way Zariah remembered. The flower boxes beneath the windows, the small playground across the street, the old maple tree whose branches stretched over half the parking lot. For the first time since waking up, something inside her relaxed. This. She smiled faintly. This feels familiar. Jasmine smiled back. I was hoping it would. They climbed the stairs to the second floor. Apartment 214. Zariah's fingers trembled as she slid the key into the lock. The door opened slowly. The scent of vanilla and cinnamon greeted her first. Then came the memories. Not forgotten memories, but older ones that had never disappeared. Her grandmother sitting at the tiny kitchen table, teaching her how to knead biscuit dough. Late-night study sessions during nursing school. The excitement of signing her very first lease. She stepped inside. Nothing seemed out of place. The bookshelf stood exactly where she remembered. The blue throw blanket still rested across the couch. Framed family photographs lined the walls. Only one thing had changed. Fresh flowers sat on the dining table. The refrigerator hummed with recently stocked groceries. A note rested on the kitchen counter. It was written in careful handwriting. Take your time. There's no rush to come back. Whatever you decide, I only want you to feel safe. Grace and Zariah read it twice. Then a third time. No pleading. No guilt. No demand that she return to him. Just concern. She folded the note carefully instead of throwing it away. Jasmine noticed. I told you. Told me what? He's been like that ever since the accident. Zariah looked up. What accident? The first one. Jasmine's smile faded. You almost died, Z. The room suddenly felt colder. You were driving home after a charity fundraiser. I don't remember. I know. Jasmine sat on the couch and took a slow breath. You were unconscious for 3 days. Zariah lowered herself into the armchair opposite her. And Grayson? He never left the hospital. She frowned. Not once? Jasmine shook her head. He slept in waiting rooms. He skipped board meetings. He ignored reporters. He even missed an international business conference everyone said was worth millions. Because of me. Because of you. Jasmine smiled sadly. I've never seen anyone pray the way he prayed those 3 days. Silence settled between them. Finally, Zariah spoke. I wish I remembered. I know. I feel like everyone keeps introducing me to a version of myself I've never met. Jasmine nodded thoughtfully. Maybe that's because the woman you became after the accident surprised all of us. What do you mean? You slowed down. You stopped working 80-hour weeks. You started painting again. I paint? Amazing landscapes. You also convinced Grayson to volunteer with you once a month at a free neighborhood clinic. Zariah blinked. The billionaire? Jasmine laughed. He was terrible with paperwork. But the kids loved him. A tiny smile found its way onto Zariah's face. The image seemed impossible. Grayson Bennett, one of the richest men in the country, fumbling with medical forms while children climbed into his lap. It didn't fit the headlines she remembered reading. Then again, nothing about him had fit the headlines. Her eyes wandered across the apartment. Everything looked exactly as she had left it 22 months earlier. Everything except a framed photograph sat beside the television. She didn't remember putting it there. Curious, she picked it up. It showed her wearing paint-stained jeans, laughing as she held up a half-finished canvas. Standing beside her was Grayson. His white t-shirt was covered in blue and yellow paint. One streak crossed his cheek. Another covered his hands. Neither of them appeared to care. Someone had captured the exact moment they burst into laughter. There was no red carpet. No luxury. No cameras. Just happiness. Real happiness. Almost without thinking, Zariah turned the frame over. A handwritten note covered the back. To remind us that perfection was never the goal. Only joy. G. Her throat tightened. She didn't remember that day. But whoever Grayson had been to her, he had understood something important. Life wasn't built from extraordinary moments alone. Sometimes the memories that mattered most were the ordinary afternoons that no one planned. As she carefully returned the photograph to the shelf, her phone vibrated. An unfamiliar number. She hesitated before answering. Hello? A cheerful, elderly voice responded. Zariah, sweetheart. It's Mrs. Donnelly from downstairs. Zariah froze. The name sounded vaguely familiar. I heard you were finally home. Mrs. Donnelly continued warmly. I baked your favorite blueberry muffins. I'll bring them up in a little while. Before Zariah could answer, the older woman added with a chuckle, and tell that handsome husband of yours he still owes me a rematch in chess. The line went quiet. Zariah slowly lowered the phone. Even her elderly neighbor knew Grayson. Not as a billionaire. Not as a celebrity. Simply as her husband. She looked toward the window. Across the parking lot, a black SUV remained parked beneath the maple tree. Grayson hadn't left. He wasn't watching the apartment. He wasn't trying to come inside. He simply sat behind the wheel with a laptop open, giving her the space she had asked for while staying close enough in case she needed help. For the first time since losing her memories, Zariah asked herself a question that frightened her more than anything else. If this gentle, patient man was truly the Grayson Bennett everyone had been describing, then perhaps the greatest mystery wasn't why she had forgotten him. Perhaps the greatest mystery was how she had been lucky enough to fall in love with him in the first place. 3 days passed before Zariah agreed to see Grayson again. Not because he kept asking, but because he never did. He never appeared uninvited. He never flooded her phone with messages. He never sent extravagant gifts in an attempt to win her trust. Instead, every morning around 8 o'clock, a small paper bag appeared outside her apartment door. Inside was breakfast from the neighborhood cafe she had loved since nursing school. A fresh fruit cup, a warm croissant, and always the same handwritten note. No pressure. I just wanted to make sure you remembered to eat. Have a good day. G. Nothing more. No declarations of love. No reminders that they were married. No requests to call him. By the 4th morning, Zariah found herself lingering over the notes before carefully placing them in a kitchen drawer she couldn't explain why she didn't want to empty. Jasmine noticed. You've kept every one of them. I guess I have. What does that tell you? Zariah smiled faintly. That I don't like wasting paper. Jasmine laughed. You've always been terrible at lying. Zariah shook her head. I don't know what I'm feeling. And that's okay. She appreciated that answer. Everyone else seemed eager for her memories to return. Jasmine simply gave her permission to feel confused. That alone made her feel less alone. Later that afternoon, her phone rang. Grayson's name appeared on the screen. She stared at it for several seconds before answering. Hello? His voice was calm. Hi. Silence followed. Neither seemed certain how to begin. Finally, he cleared his throat. I hope I'm not interrupting. No. I actually called because, he hesitated. Your grandmother's grave needs fresh flowers. Zariah blinked. My grandmother? I usually visit her every Sunday. The words caught her completely off guard. You do? I promised her I would. You knew my grandmother? A soft chuckle escaped him. She made sure I earned the privilege. Despite herself, Zariah smiled. That sounds like her. It does. Another comfortable silence settled between them. I was wondering. Grayson continued carefully. If you'd like to come with me, you don't have to. If the answer is no, that's perfectly fine. Zariah looked toward the framed photograph of her grandmother on the bookshelf. She hadn't visited the cemetery since waking up. The thought filled her with guilt. I'll go. There was a pause. Then she heard something she hadn't expected. Relief. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet exhale. I'll pick you up at 2. Actually, she stopped herself. Yes? I'd rather drive myself. Of course. No argument, no disappointment in his voice. Only acceptance. I'll meet you there. When the call ended, Jasmine looked at her with raised eyebrows. Cemetery? Zariah nodded. I'm not ready to sit across from him at dinner. But... She glanced toward her grandmother's photograph. I think she'd be disappointed if I stayed away because I was afraid. Sunday arrived with cool mountain air and clear blue skies. The cemetery rested on a quiet hillside overlooking Denver. Rows of oak trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves whispering softly overhead. Zariah spotted Grayson immediately. He was already there, not standing, kneeling. Fresh white lilies rested beside the headstone. He was carefully pulling small weeds from the grass surrounding the grave. He hadn't noticed her yet. She remained where she was, watching quietly. There was something deeply humbling about the sight. The billionaire whose face appeared on magazine covers, the man whose companies employed thousands, was on his knees in the dirt, cleaning the resting place of a woman who had never possessed wealth. He wasn't doing it because cameras were watching. There weren't any. He wasn't doing it because reporters might write about it. No one else was there. He was doing it because he had made a promise. And promises, it seemed, mattered to him. A few moments later, he stood and turned. Their eyes met. He smiled gently. I'm glad you came. So am I. He stepped aside, giving her room to approach the grave first. The polished granite read, Evelyn Carter. A loving grandmother, a faithful friend, a beautiful soul beneath her name, were the words Zariah knew by heart. Character is what remains when everything else is taken away. Her throat tightened. Her grandmother had repeated that sentence throughout her childhood, whenever life became difficult, whenever someone treated others unfairly, whenever success threatened to become more important than kindness. Character, not money, not status, not appearance. Character. A tear slipped down Zariah's cheek. I miss her. Grayson didn't reply immediately. Instead, he quietly handed her a clean handkerchief. She accepted it without thinking. After several minutes, she spoke again. Did she like you? A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I don't think like is the right word. Zariah looked at him curiously. She interviewed me. I interviewed you? For 3 hours. Despite her sadness, Zariah laughed. That sounds exactly like Grandma. She asked me questions I wasn't expecting. Like what? What kind of man are you when no one is watching? Zariah smiled. That definitely sounds like her. Oh, can you apologize without making excuses? Trademark. He laughed softly. Would you still respect my granddaughter if she never accomplished another thing in her life? The laughter slowly faded. Did you answer? I tried. And? I don't think she believed me. Zariah looked surprised. What changed her mind? Grayson lowered his eyes toward the headstone. Nothing I said. What I did. He gently brushed a few fallen leaves away from the flowers. She told me that words introduce a person. But habits reveal them. Those words settled deep inside Zariah. They reminded her that trust isn't built through impressive speeches. It's built through consistent actions repeated over time. She looked at Grayson differently. Not with love. Not yet. But with growing curiosity. Perhaps the man standing beside her wasn't asking her to remember the past. Perhaps he was patiently inviting her to discover who he really was in the present. And for the first time since waking up in his mansion, that possibility no longer frightened her. It intrigued her. As they left the cemetery, neither of them hurried toward their cars. The afternoon sun hung low over the mountains, bathing the winding roads in a soft golden glow. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine through the quiet hillside, and for a few moments, neither Zariah nor Grayson felt the need to break the silence. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was thoughtful. The kind that comes when two strangers are trying to understand whether they have anything left to say to one another. Grayson finally glanced at his watch before looking back at her. Would you like some coffee? Zariah hesitated. The question itself wasn't difficult. It was everything it represented. Only a week earlier, waking up beside him had filled her with panic. Now he was asking her to share a cup of coffee. Not as a husband demanding his place. Not even as a man trying to win her back. Simply as someone offering to spend an hour together. If you'd rather go home, he added. I understand. She studied his face. He always seemed to leave the decision with her. No pressure. No persuasion. Just a choice. I can stay for a little while. His smile was small but genuine. I know a place you'll probably recognize. 15 minutes later, they arrived at a small neighborhood cafe tucked between an old bookstore and a flower shop. The wooden sign above the entrance read, Willow and Bean. The moment Zariah stepped inside, something stirred deep within her. The rich aroma of roasted coffee beans. The soft jazz drifting through hidden speakers. The shelves lined with novels people were free to borrow. The elderly owner greeting customers by name. It all felt comforting. I've been here before. Grayson smiled. Many times. She slowly turned in a circle. I remember this place. Not clearly, not completely, but enough to know she had once loved it. A waitress looked up from behind the counter. The moment she saw them, her face lit up. Well, look who's finally back. She hurried over, wiping her hands on her apron. Zariah! Before embracing her, the woman stopped. Concern replaced excitement. I heard about the accident. Zariah forced a polite smile. I'm still trying to figure everything out. The waitress nodded sympathetically before turning to Grayson. You finally convinced her to come back. I didn't convince anyone, he replied. She made the decision herself. The waitress laughed. Still letting her win every argument? Grayson shrugged. I've learned it's healthier that way. The woman chuckled before leading them toward a table near the window. The usual? Grayson looked at Zariah. You should decide. She frowned. I don't know what I usually order. He smiled. Then today, you get to discover something new. That simple answer stayed with her. He could have told the waitress exactly what she always drank. He could have reminded her of favorite pastries. Instead, he allowed her to choose without comparing her to the woman she couldn't remember being. She appreciated that more than she expected. A few minutes later, steaming mugs rested between them. Outside, people wandered along the sidewalk, carrying shopping bags and walking dogs. Inside, the cafe buzzed with quiet conversations. For a while, they spoke about ordinary things. The weather, the bookstore next door, the mountain trails outside Denver. Nothing about memory. Nothing about hospitals. Nothing about marriage. For the first time since waking up in the mansion, Zariah almost forgot she was sitting across from the man who claimed to be her husband. He wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't talking about business deals worth millions of dollars. In fact, she noticed something surprising. He spent most of the conversation asking questions about her. What made you become a trauma nurse? What was your grandmother like when she wasn't giving life advice? What kind of books do you enjoy reading? The questions were simple, curious, respectful. Eventually she laughed softly. You know. He looked up. What? You already know all these answers. I do. So why are you asking? Grayson wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. Because the woman sitting across from me today deserves the chance to answer them herself. His words lingered between them. I don't want yesterday's memories to become today's expectations. I want to know who you are now. Zariah looked down at her cup. No one had ever explained love that way. Not as possession, not as history, but as a willingness to keep discovering the person in front of you. Her grandmother would have admired that. As they prepared to leave, the cafe owner approached their table. Mr. Alvarez was well into his 70s, with silver hair, kind eyes, and the gentle smile of someone who had spent decades listening to other people's stories. He rested one hand on the back of an empty chair. It's good to see you both. Grayson stood to shake his hand. It's good to be back. Mr. Alvarez turned towards Zariah. I was worried when I heard about your memory. I'm still trying to understand it. The older man nodded. I imagine you are. He reached beneath the counter and returned holding a small sketchbook wrapped in brown paper. I've been keeping this safe. Zariah frowned. For me? You left it here a few months ago. She carefully removed the paper. Inside was a hardcover sketchbook. The first page contained a handwritten note. For the days when words aren't enough. Keep drawing. Gee, her fingers trembled. Slowly, she turned the page. Watercolor landscapes, mountain lakes, sunsets, children playing in city parks. The artwork was beautiful. Far better than anything she remembered ever painting. She flipped through page after page in stunned silence. Every painting had been created by her own hands, yet they felt as though they belonged to someone else. One page near the back stopped her completely. It wasn't a landscape. It was Grayson. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit. He sat on the apartment floor in old jeans, assembling a bookshelf with a screwdriver in one hand and the instruction manual upside down in the other. Across the bottom of the page, she had written, "He pretends he doesn't need help, but he's adorable when he's confused." Without realizing it, Zariah smiled. A real smile. Not because she remembered drawing it, but because whoever she had been, she had seen something gentle in him. Mr. Alvarez noticed. That's the first genuine smile I've seen from you all day. Zariah closed the sketchbook slowly. I don't remember drawing any of this. You don't have to remember it to know it came from your heart, the old man said softly. Sometimes our creations tell us who we are, long before our memories catch up. Those words followed her all the way to the car. As she looked once more at the sketchbook resting in her lap, she realized something important. The missing months had not erased the kind of woman she had become. Pieces of her were still here, in her paintings, in the people who loved her, in the quiet kindness she kept discovering in Grayson. Perhaps recovering her life wasn't about chasing lost memories after all. Perhaps it was about recognizing herself in the things she had left behind. And for the first time since everything had changed, hope didn't feel impossible. It felt possible. For nearly 3 weeks, life settled into an unexpected rhythm. Every Tuesday afternoon, Grayson and Zariah met for coffee. Every Saturday morning, they volunteered at the neighborhood health clinic where Jasmine worked twice a month. It hadn't been Grayson's idea. It had been Zariah's. When she learned that volunteering there had once been important to her, she asked if she could return. Not because she remembered the place, but because she wanted to understand the woman she had become. No one at the clinic treated her like a fragile patient. They welcomed her back with warm smiles, gentle encouragement, and enough patience to make her feel useful instead of broken. She wasn't allowed to treat emergency cases yet, but she helped organize medical supplies, greeted families, and comforted anxious children waiting to see a doctor. It was enough. One Saturday afternoon, a little boy with a scraped knee refused to let anyone clean his wound. He cried, kicked, and buried his face in his mother's shoulder. The nurses tried everything. Nothing worked. Zariah knelt until she was at eye level with him. Can I tell you a secret? The little boy sniffled. I used to be scared of hospitals too. He peeked at her through tear-filled eyes. You did? She nodded. When I was your age, I thought every bandage hurt. What happened? My grandmother taught me something. She smiled gently. She said courage doesn't mean you're never afraid. It means you choose to do the right thing even while you're scared. The little boy thought about that for a long moment. Then, slowly, he stretched out his injured leg. The nurse cleaned the scrape. Within 2 minutes, it was over. There, Zariah said with a grin. You were brave. No, the boy replied proudly. I was courageous. The adults nearby laughed softly. Across the room, Grayson watched the exchange in silence. He had seen billion-dollar negotiations. He had spoken before thousands of investors. He had signed contracts that changed entire industries. Yet watching Zariah calm a frightened child somehow felt more impressive than all of it. Because she didn't simply treat injuries. She restored confidence. Later that afternoon, as they packed supplies into storage cabinets, Jasmine walked over carrying a large envelope. Z, this came for you. Zariah looked at the unfamiliar logo. It belonged to the International Medical Alliance. I don't remember applying for anything. You didn't. Jasmine smiled. You applied almost a year ago. Confused, Zariah carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a formal letter. Her eyes moved slowly across the page. Then she stopped. What is it? Jasmine asked. Zariah looked up. They're offering me the position. What position? Director of Emergency Medical Training. Her voice grew quieter. For their East Africa humanitarian program. Jasmine's eyes widened. Z. They chose me. The room suddenly felt very still. The assignment would last 18 months. She would help train local nurses, establish emergency response systems, and oversee medical outreach in underserved communities. It was exactly the kind of work she had dreamed about long before the missing 22 months. She should have been celebrating. Instead, uncertainty settled over her. She glanced across the room. Grayson was speaking with an elderly volunteer, completely unaware of the letter in her hands. She folded it carefully. I don't even know if I'm the same person who applied. Jasmine lowered her voice. Maybe not. But maybe the dream is still yours. That evening, Zariah sat alone in her apartment, with the letter resting on the kitchen table. She read it once, then again, then a third time. Each time, the opportunity seemed larger, more intimidating, more exciting. She imagined working in communities with limited resources, teaching young nurses, helping mothers and children who had little access to emergency care. It was meaningful work, the kind her grandmother had always encouraged. Success isn't measured by how many people know your name, Evelyn Carter used to say. It's measured by how many lives become better because you lived. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Grayson holding a small paper bag from the bakery. I was in the neighborhood. She raised an eyebrow. You were? He smiled sheepishly. I may have taken the long way home. She couldn't help laughing. You can come in? He stepped inside, placing the bag on the counter. I brought lemon scones. How did you know they're my favorite? He paused. Then he smiled. I didn't. I guessed. She looked at him suspiciously. You guessed correctly. I've always been unusually lucky. For the first time in weeks, they laughed together without awkwardness. As they poured tea, Zariah glanced at the letter again. Grayson noticed. Everything okay? She hesitated, then handed it to him. He read every page carefully. When he finished, he looked at her, not with surprise but with unmistakable pride. This is incredible. You really think so? I know so. She searched his face. You're not upset? Why would I be? Because it's 18 months. In another country. She expected him to remind her they were married, to ask her not to go, to tell her they could build a life together here. Instead, he folded the letter neatly and handed it back. Do you want it? She blinked. What? The job. I don't know. He nodded thoughtfully. Then don't decide because of me. She frowned. What do you mean? If you stay, he met her eyes. I want it to be because staying is truly what you want. And if I go? A gentle smile crossed his face. Then I'll be the first person cheering for you at the airport. His answer caught her completely off guard. Most people would fight to keep someone they loved close. Grayson seemed willing to risk losing her altogether if it meant she wouldn't abandon her dreams. She looked down at the acceptance letter again. For the first time, she understood something her grandmother had tried to teach her for years. Real love isn't afraid of another person's growth. It celebrates it. And somehow, that realization made the decision even harder. The acceptance letter remained on Zariah's kitchen table for 4 days. 4 mornings. 4 restless nights. 4 days of imagining 2 completely different futures. In one future, she stayed in Denver. She continued rebuilding the marriage everyone insisted had once been beautiful. She kept volunteering at the clinic, slowly rediscovering pieces of herself while learning to trust Grayson one conversation at a time. In the other future, she boarded a plane to East Africa. She immersed herself in humanitarian medicine, trained young nurses, and serve communities where every lesson she taught could save lives long after she returned home. Neither future felt wrong. That was the problem. Every time she convinced herself to stay, her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. Don't let fear make decisions that courage was meant to make. Then she would convince herself to go, only to remember Grayson's quiet smile, the patient way he waited for her to take each step on her own, and the strange sense of peace she felt whenever they were together. For the first time in her life, two good choices were pulling her in opposite directions. She wasn't choosing between right and wrong. She was choosing between two versions of the life she wanted to build. That made the decision far more difficult. Late Friday afternoon, Jasmine stopped by the apartment carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. I figured coffee wasn't strong enough for this conversation. Zariah laughed softly as she opened the door. You know me too well. I've had years of practice. They settled onto the couch. The acceptance letter still rested on the coffee table. Untouched, Jasmine picked it up. So? No. No? I still haven't decided. Jasmine nodded thoughtfully. Can I ask you something? You always do. If Grayson didn't exist. Zariah looked at her. Would you accept this position? The question landed like a stone in still water. Without thinking, Zariah answered. Yes. There wasn't even a second of hesitation. The answer had come straight from her heart. Jasmine smiled gently. Then maybe the real question isn't whether you should go. It's whether you're afraid of what leaving might cost. Zariah looked toward the window. I finally feel like I'm getting to know him. You are. What if I leave? And when I come back, we're strangers all over again? Jasmine reached for her hand. Z, healthy relationships don't survive because 2 people stay in the same place. They survive because both people keep choosing each other. She paused before adding quietly, and if the relationship only works when one person gives up their dreams, then it was never healthy to begin with. The words settled deeply inside Zariah. They reminded her of everything her grandmother had believed. Love should never require someone to become smaller. That evening, Grayson called. I'm making dinner. His voice was warm, almost hesitant. I accidentally cooked enough for 4 people. She laughed. Accidentally? I'm still terrible at judging portions. You own restaurants. I own companies. I still burn grilled cheese. She smiled. That's strangely comforting. It should be. There was a brief silence. I was wondering if you'd like to come over. She hesitated, then nodded, even though he couldn't see her. I'd like that. The mansion felt different this time, less intimidating, less like the place where she had woken in terror. The house still carried the quiet elegance she remembered from that first morning, but now she noticed the details she had overlooked. Family photographs weren't displayed because they were expensive. They were displayed because someone genuinely treasured the memories. Fresh flowers sat in simple glass vases instead of extravagant arrangements. Books filled nearly every shelf. Several had folded pages and handwritten notes tucked between the chapters. The house wasn't trying to impress visitors. It reflected the people who lived there. Grayson met her at the front door wearing jeans, sneakers, and a navy blue sweater with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. No tailored suit, no designer watch, no billionaire image. Just a man carrying a wooden spoon. Dinner's almost ready, she smiled. I never pictured billionaires cooking. I never pictured myself becoming one. That answer surprised her. You didn't? He shook his head as they walked toward the kitchen. I wanted to design environmentally sustainable neighborhoods. So, what happened? Life happened. He stirred a pot of soup before lowering the heat. My company grew faster than I expected. I spent years chasing expansion. He smiled sadly. I became very successful. But I wasn't very present. Zariah leaned against the counter. And then? He looked at her. Then I met a trauma nurse who reminded me that success means very little if you don't have time for the people you love. Her cheeks warmed. Even without remembering those conversations, she could imagine saying something like that. Dinner was simple. Homemade tomato soup, grilled sandwiches, fresh salad, nothing extravagant. Halfway through the meal, Grayson noticed the folded acceptance letter peeking out of her purse. You still haven't decided? No. I've been waiting for you to tell me not to go. He looked genuinely confused. Why? Because we're... She glanced at the wedding ring. Married. He sat quietly for several moments before speaking. When we exchanged vows, and I promised to stand beside your dreams, not in front of them. His voice remained calm. If I asked you to stay because I was afraid of losing you, I'd be breaking the very promise I made on our wedding day. Tears stung Zariah's eyes. You really mean that? I do. He smiled softly. I'd rather miss you for 18 months than watch you spend the rest of your life wondering who you could have become. Those words broke something open inside her. Not her memories, her fear. For the first time since waking up in his bed, she understood that Grayson wasn't trying to reclaim the woman he had lost. He was protecting the woman standing in front of him now, whether that woman eventually chose him or not. Later that night, after she returned to her apartment, Zariah sat alone on her balcony, watching the city lights shimmer beneath the stars. She unfolded the acceptance letter one last time. Then she reached for her laptop. With trembling fingers, she opened a new email. She stared at the blank screen for nearly 5 minutes. Finally, she began to type. When she finished, she didn't read it again. She simply closed her eyes and pressed send. Some decisions change the direction of your life. Others reveal the kind of person you are becoming. Zariah didn't know whether she had just made the right choice, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. For the first time since losing her memories, the decision had been entirely her own. The reply arrived 3 days later. Zariah had just returned from volunteering at the neighborhood clinic when she noticed the email notification glowing on her phone. For several seconds, she simply stared at the screen. She already knew what it would say. She had accepted the position. The International Medical Alliance had confirmed her start date. There was no reason for them to reject someone they had already chosen. Still, opening the email felt strangely terrifying. Because once she read those words, her future would stop being an idea. It would become a plan. She unlocked her phone. Her eyes skimmed the message. Dear Miss Carter, we are delighted to confirm your acceptance into our East Africa Emergency Medical Training Program. Orientation begins in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. That was all. 6 weeks before she would leave the country. 6 weeks before putting thousands of miles between herself and the only people who had helped her rebuild the fragments of her life. She slowly lowered the phone. The apartment suddenly felt quieter than usual. Not lonely, just different. Every room reminded her that she had finally begun creating a routine again. Morning walks, volunteer shifts, coffee with Jasmine, conversations with Grayson that had gradually become easier. Leaving meant disrupting all of it. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She smiled before opening it. Mrs. Donnelly. The elderly woman beamed, balancing a covered casserole dish in both hands. I made too much chicken pot pie. Zariah laughed. You always make too much. I do that on purpose. Mrs. Donnelly winked. So, my neighbors won't skip dinner. As they settled around the small kitchen table, the older woman noticed the thoughtful expression on Zariah's face. Bad news? No. Good news that's difficult? Zariah nodded. I accepted a humanitarian assignment overseas. Mrs. Donnelly's eyes widened. Well, she smiled proudly. Your grandmother would have been over the moon. The mention of Evelyn Carter warmed Zariah's heart. Do you really think so? I know so. The older woman reached across the table. Your grandmother always said your hands were meant to heal people, not just treat them. Zariah smiled softly. I've been wondering if I'm making the right decision. Mrs. Donnelly chuckled. My dear, at my age I've learned something. She leaned back comfortably. Life rarely asks us to choose between good and bad. The hardest decisions are usually between two good things. Those words echoed almost perfectly what Jasmine had told her days earlier. Perhaps wisdom really did sound the same, no matter who spoke it. That evening, Zariah drove to the mansion. For the first time since waking there in confusion, she didn't hesitate before ringing the bell. Grayson opened the door almost immediately. You look like you've made a decision. She held up her phone. They confirmed it. For a brief moment, something flickered across his face. Sadness. It disappeared almost as quickly as it came. Then he smiled. I'm proud of you. No hesitation. No attempt to hide disappointment behind false enthusiasm. Just genuine pride. You're really okay with this? He invited her inside before answering. No. She looked surprised. I'm going to miss you. He spoke honestly, without dramatics. Very much. But missing someone isn't the same thing as regretting their happiness. He walked toward the kitchen. Would you like some tea? She followed him. You know, I think that's the healthiest thing anyone has said to me in weeks. He smiled while filling the kettle. I've had a good teacher. Who? He looked at her. You. She laughed quietly. I don't remember teaching you anything. You probably don't. He rested both hands on the counter. But you used to remind me that loving someone means wanting their world to become bigger. Not smaller. The words stayed with her. She wished she could remember saying them, because they sounded exactly like something her grandmother would have taught her. The weeks passed more quickly than either of them expected. Between travel preparations, medical briefings, vaccinations and orientation meetings, Zariah found herself constantly busy. Yet somehow, she and Grayson continued meeting. Not every day, sometimes only once a week, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 10 minutes. Their conversations remained refreshingly ordinary. They debated books, shared meals, visited the neighborhood clinic, walked through city parks without discussing the future unless it happened naturally. One rainy afternoon, they found themselves wandering through a used bookstore while waiting for the weather to clear. Grayson disappeared into one aisle, while Zariah browsed another. Several minutes later, she noticed him smiling at a worn hardcover novel. "What did you find?" He turned the book so she could see the cover. "The Little Prince." "You've read it?" she asked. He nodded. "You made me." "I did? You said every adult should reread it at least once every few years." She smiled. "I must have been very opinionated." "You still are." He handed her the book. She opened it at random. A folded piece of paper slipped onto the floor. Grayson bent to pick it up. "It's yours." She unfolded it carefully. Written in her own handwriting were the words, "Growing older is automatic. Growing wiser is a choice." She stared at the sentence. She didn't remember writing it, yet it felt deeply familiar, almost instinctive. She slipped the note into her purse. "I think—" She looked up at Grayson. "I'm starting to understand something." "What?" "Even if I never remember those missing months, pieces of me survived." He nodded. "I've been trying to tell you that." She smiled. "I know. But sometimes we have to discover the truth ourselves before we can believe it." Grayson looked at her with quiet admiration. "There she is." She frowned. "Who?" "The woman who always found hope in places everyone else overlooked." They left the bookstore just as the rain stopped. The clouds parted, allowing warm evening sunlight to spill across the sidewalks. For a moment, everything felt almost normal, until Zariah glanced at the calendar reminder on her phone. Departure, 12 days. 12 days. The countdown had become impossible to ignore, and for the first time since accepting the assignment, she wondered whether saying goodbye would be far more difficult than saying yes. The final 12 days disappeared faster than either of them expected. There were medical briefings to attend, travel documents to complete, vaccinations to receive, and countless hours spent packing supplies that would be impossible to find in the remote communities where she would work. Boxes gradually filled her apartment. Medical textbooks, scrubs, reference manuals, family photographs. Jasmine insisted she take her grandmother's old leather-bound journal, the sketchbook Mr. Alvarez had returned to her. She paused before placing it carefully into her suitcase. It had become more than a collection of paintings. It reminded her that even when memories disappeared, the heart often left behind evidence of who a person truly was. 3 days before her flight, Jasmine invited a few close friends to the apartment. Nothing extravagant, just homemade food, laughter, and stories. People Zariah had apparently known for years gathered around her dining table, taking turns sharing memories she could no longer remember. Normally, hearing those stories made her feel like an outsider in her own life. This evening was different. Instead of grieving every missing memory, she found herself appreciating them. Each story painted another brushstroke in the portrait of the woman she had been. One colleague recalled how Zariah had stayed 16 hours after her shift ended because an elderly patient was afraid to die alone. Another remembered how she secretly paid for a young mother's prescriptions after discovering she couldn't afford them. Someone else laughed about the time Zariah organized an entire hospital fundraiser because the pediatric ward needed new equipment. "You threatened to shave Grayson's head if he didn't match every donation," one of the nurses teased. The room erupted with laughter. Zariah looked toward Grayson in surprise. "I said that?" "You absolutely did." "And what happened?" "I doubled the donation." "Because you were generous?" He grinned. "Because I value my hair." Everyone laughed again. It was the first time Zariah had laughed at stories about the missing months, instead of mourning them. For once, the past felt like a gift instead of a wound. When the guests finally left, Jasmine quietly gathered empty plates, while Grayson carried dishes into the kitchen. The apartment settled into a comfortable silence. Jasmine watched them from across the room. She smiled to herself. They still weren't the couple they had once been, but they had become something equally precious. Friends, real friends, built not on forgotten memories, but on fresh choices. Before leaving, Jasmine hugged Zariah tightly. "Call me the minute you land." "I will. And don't pretend you aren't exhausted." "I never pretend." "You absolutely do." They both laughed. Then Jasmine turned to Grayson. "Take care of yourself too." I'll try. No. She pointed a finger at him. You'll actually do it. He surrendered with a smile. Yes, Mum. The morning before her departure, Grayson asked if she would meet him one last time. She found him exactly where she expected. Willow and Bean. Their usual table near the window was waiting. The owner greeted them with the familiar warmth of an old friend. You two have become part of the furniture around here. Grayson chuckled. I hope that's a compliment. It is. Mr. Alvarez brought them coffee without asking what they wanted. When he walked away, Zariah smiled. I guess some things really don't change. They don't. For a while, they simply watched people passing outside. Parents pushing strollers, students carrying backpacks, a street musician tuning his guitar. Ordinary life continuing exactly as it always had. Eventually, Zariah broke the silence. I'm scared. Grayson looked at her. Of the work? No. Then what? She traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. I'm afraid 18 months is a long time. It is. What if... She hesitated. What if I come back? And we're different people? He considered the question carefully before answering. We will be. She frowned. You agree? I hope so. She looked confused. He leaned forward slightly. If we come back exactly the same after 18 months? Then, neither of us spent those months growing. She hadn't expected that answer. I want you to change, he continued gently. I want you to learn things. Meet incredible people. Become an even better nurse. And I hope I become a better man while you're away. He smiled. Growth shouldn't frighten us. It should inspire us. She felt tears gathering again. You always know what to say. He shook his head. No. I've just had an excellent teacher. Departure day arrived beneath a pale morning sky. Denver International Airport buzzed with the familiar rhythm of departures and reunions. Rolling suitcases echoed across polished floors. Announcements drifted through overhead speakers. Children laughed. Families hugged. Business travelers hurried toward security. Life moved forward, indifferent to individual heartbreaks. Jasmine insisted on driving Zariah to the airport. Grayson followed in his own car. Neither wanted the final goodbye to feel rushed. At the departure entrance, the three of them stood together beside two large suitcases. Jasmine hugged Zariah first, so tightly that neither spoke for nearly a full minute. Finally, Jasmine whispered, Go make your grandmother proud. Zariah nodded against her shoulder. I'll try. You don't have to try. You already are. Another hug. Another smile through tears. Then Jasmine stepped back, giving Grayson the space she knew he needed. For several moments, neither of them moved. There was so much they could have said. Too much, perhaps. Finally, Grayson reached into the pocket of his jacket. I have something for you. He handed her a small leather notebook. She opened it carefully. The first page contained only one sentence written in his familiar handwriting. For every story you collect while changing someone else's life. The remaining pages were blank. She looked up. A journal? I thought. Oh, he smiled softly. If your memories can disappear once, maybe your future deserves to be written down. Emotion caught in her throat. It wasn't an expensive gift. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't something a billionaire would buy. It was something a man who truly knew her would choose. She closed the notebook gently. I'll fill every page. I know you will. An announcement echoed across the terminal. Final boarding for Flight 482 to Nairobi. Time had run out. Without thinking, Zariah stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. For just a moment, Grayson stood perfectly still. Then he hugged her back. Not tightly, not desperately, just enough to let her know she wasn't alone. When they separated, neither tried to hide the tears in their eyes. I don't know what happens after 18 months, Zariah admitted. Grayson smiled through the emotion. You don't have to. You only have to live them. She nodded slowly. Then she reached for his hand. I can't promise that my memories will come back. I know. I can't promise that I'll return feeling exactly the way I once did. I know. But I can promise one thing. She squeezed his hand gently. When I come home, I'll choose whatever feels true. He held her gaze. That's all I've ever wanted. No promises, no pressure, no impossible expectations. Just honesty. She smiled one last time before picking up her carry-on bag. Then she turned and walked towards security. She didn't look back immediately. She forced herself to keep walking until she reached the entrance. Only then did she turn. Grayson was still standing exactly where she had left him, hands in his pockets, watching quietly, not asking her to stay, not asking her to hurry back. simply believing that some journeys were worth taking, even when they carried the people you loved far away. Zariah lifted one hand. He did the same. A final silent goodbye. Then she disappeared beyond the security checkpoint. Grayson remained where he was for several moments after she was gone. The terminal had become just another airport to everyone else. But to him, it had become the place where love proved itself once again. Not by holding on, but by having the courage to let go. Far above the clouds, as the airplane climbed toward the morning sun, Zariah opened the leather journal. On the second page, she wrote her very first sentence. Day 1. I'm leaving behind the life I forgot, to discover the woman I'm still becoming. Sometimes, the greatest act of love isn't holding on. It's having the courage to let someone chase the life they were meant to live. Now it's your turn. If you were in Zariah's position, would you have accepted the humanitarian mission, or would you have stayed to rebuild your marriage with Grayson? Share your answer in the comments. I read them all, and I'd love to hear what you think. If this story has touched your heart so far, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Because, in Chapter 6, 18 months will change everything. New faces, new challenges, unexpected heartbreak, and a reunion that neither Grayson nor Zariah could have imagined. See you in the next chapter. The roar of the airplane engines slowly faded as Zariah stepped out into the warm afternoon air. Everything felt different. The sky seemed wider, the sunlight brighter. Even the wind carried unfamiliar scents of earth, rain, and distant fields. She paused at the bottom of the aircraft stairs, taking her first deep breath. For a brief moment, thousands of miles separated her from everything familiar. Denver, the neighborhood clinic, Jasmine, Willow, and Bean. And Grayson. She rested one hand against the leather journal tucked inside her backpack. The same journal he had given her at the airport. It already held 3 pages. Not because remarkable things had happened during the journey, but because she had promised herself something before takeoff. If her memories ever failed her again, her words wouldn't. The humanitarian organization's regional headquarters buzzed with activity. Doctors, nurses, logistics specialists, engineers, and volunteers from more than a dozen countries moved through the halls carrying maps, medical kits, laptops, and stacks of paperwork. Everyone seemed to be preparing for something important. A woman wearing a navy field vest approached with a welcoming smile. You must be Zariah Carter. I am. I'm Dr. Amina Hassan. She extended her hand warmly. We've been looking forward to meeting you. Dr. Hassan carried herself with quiet confidence. She spoke gently but moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions every day. As they walked through the compound, she explained the mission. We don't simply treat emergencies. We train local professionals. We strengthen hospitals. We help communities build systems that will continue saving lives long after we're gone. Zariah smiled. That's exactly why I accepted. Dr. Hassan nodded approvingly. I thought it might be. Orientation lasted nearly a week. Every morning began before sunrise. Every evening ended long after dark. The work was demanding. Emergency response planning, disease surveillance, trauma care in low-resource settings, leadership workshops, cross-cultural communication. It challenged everything Zariah thought she knew. One afternoon, while practicing emergency simulations, a younger nurse named Leah struggled to organize a trauma team during a mock disaster exercise. Voices overlapped. Instructions became confusing. The simulation quickly descended into chaos. Some participants grew frustrated. Others simply stood, frozen. Dr. Hassan allowed the exercise to continue for another minute before stopping everyone. Silence filled the room. She turned toward Zariah. What would you do differently? Every eye shifted toward her. Zariah stood slowly. She looked around the room before answering. I wouldn't start by giving orders. Several participants exchanged puzzled glances. She continued. I'd start by listening. Dr. Hassan folded her arms. Explain. When people panic, they stop feeling heard. If a leader only talks, people hear noise. But when a leader first understands what's causing the confusion, the solution becomes much clearer. The room remained silent, not because anyone disagreed, because they were thinking. Dr. Hassan smiled. Excellent. She turned toward the rest of the group. Leadership isn't measured by the volume of your voice. It's measured by the confidence your presence gives everyone else. Those words stayed with Zariah for the rest of the day. They reminded her once again of her grandmother. The strongest people she had known had rarely been the loudest. That evening, after dinner, she sat outside her small guest house, beneath a sky crowded with stars. She opened Grayson's journal. Day 9. Today, I remembered something without remembering it. Leadership isn't about controlling people. It's about helping them believe they can succeed together. I don't know whether this lesson came from Grandma, from nursing, or from Grayson. Maybe it came from all three. She smiled as she closed the notebook. Some lessons didn't belong to one person. They became part of whoever was willing to live them. Weeks gradually became months. The work grew more demanding with each passing day. Some mornings began with training sessions. Others began with emergency calls from villages several hours away. She helped establish triage systems in rural clinics, designed trauma workshops for local nurses, worked beside doctors who often accomplished miracles with equipment many hospitals in America would consider inadequate. Every success felt shared. Every setback became another lesson. One rainy afternoon, a frightened young nurse approached her after class. "I don't think I'm good enough." The woman couldn't have been older than 23. "My English isn't perfect. I get nervous. What if I make mistakes?" Zariah remembered feeling exactly the same during her first months as a trauma nurse. She smiled reassuringly. "Do you know what patients remember most?" The younger woman shook her head. "They remember how you made them feel. They rarely remember whether your grammar was perfect. They remember whether you cared." The nurse wiped away a tear. "My grandmother used to say." Zariah paused. She smiled. Apparently, she was becoming more like Evelyn Carter every day. People forgive honest mistakes much faster than they forgive indifference. The young woman smiled. "I'll remember that." "I hope you don't." The nurse looked confused. "I hope one day you won't need to remember it." "Because it'll simply become part of who you are." Nearly 8 months passed before Zariah realized she had stopped counting the days. Not because she had forgotten home, but because this place had slowly begun feeling like one too. She laughed more easily. She slept more peacefully. She no longer introduced herself as the nurse with memory loss. She introduced herself simply as Zariah. One evening, while organizing teaching materials, Dr. Hassan walked into her office carrying a folder. "You've changed." Zariah looked up from her desk. "I hope that's a good thing." "It is." Dr. Hassan sat across from her. The woman who arrived here was trying to find herself. She smiled warmly. "The woman sitting in front of me now is helping other people find themselves." Emotion quietly settled over Zariah. She hadn't noticed the change. Growth rarely announced itself while it was happening. It only became visible when someone paused long enough to look back. Before leaving, Dr. Hassan placed a sealed envelope on the desk. It arrived from the United States. Zariah recognized the handwriting instantly. Grayson. For several moments, she simply stared at the envelope. 8 months. They had exchanged occasional emails and brief phone calls whenever schedules allowed. But this was different. A handwritten letter. She carefully ran her fingers across the familiar handwriting. Then, with a smile she hadn't realized was forming, she slowly opened it. And for reasons she couldn't explain, her heart began beating just a little faster. For a long moment, Zariah simply held the envelope. The paper was slightly creased from its journey across continents. A blue international postage stamp sat neatly in the corner. Her name was written in Grayson's unmistakable handwriting. Not rushed, not overly careful, just steady. The sight of it made her smile. It was strange how something as ordinary as handwriting could feel comforting. She slowly unfolded the letter. "Dear Zariah, I spent nearly an hour trying to decide how to begin this letter. Every version sounded too formal or too sentimental, so I decided to tell the truth instead. I miss my friend. Not because the house is quieter, not because Willow and Bean keeps asking where you are, and not because Jasmine keeps reminding me that I still can't make grilled cheese without burning it. I miss the conversations, the questions you always asked, the way you could turn an ordinary afternoon into something worth remembering. I hope you're finding those moments where you are now. I hope you're laughing. I hope you're sleeping enough, although I'm almost certain you aren't. Please don't skip meals just because you're busy. Yes, I know you're rolling your eyes while reading that sentence. Some things never change. The neighborhood clinic is doing well. The children's reading corner you suggested is finally finished. You would have loved seeing their faces the first day it opened. Mrs. Donnelly still insists on bringing enough food for half the neighborhood. Jasmine still pretends she isn't worried about everyone. And Mr. Alvarez refuses to let anyone sit at our table near the window. He says it's reserved until a certain stubborn nurse comes home. Life has continued here. Different, but good. I hope life is good there too. I don't expect you to write back immediately. I only wanted you to know something. You once told me that distance doesn't weaken relationships. Neglect does. So this is simply my way of making sure that, no matter how many miles separate us, you never have to wonder whether someone is quietly cheering for you. Take care of yourself. I'm proud of you. Always. Grayson. By the time she reached the final line, tears blurred the words. Not tears of sadness, not even longing. They were the quiet tears that appear when someone makes you feel remembered. He hadn't written about himself. He hadn't asked when she was coming back. He hadn't tried to remind her that they were married. Instead, he had written exactly the kind of letter she needed. One that expected nothing in return. She carefully folded it and placed it inside the front cover of the leather journal. Some things deserve to be protected. That evening, rain tapped softly against the roof of the guest house. Unable to sleep, Zariah opened her laptop. She stared at the blank email screen. Then she closed it again. An email suddenly felt too ordinary. Instead, she reached for a sheet of stationery Dr. Hassan kept for handwritten correspondence. She uncapped her pen. For several minutes, nothing came. Then the words began flowing almost on their own. Dear Grayson, your letter arrived today. I think it traveled farther than either of us ever imagined. Thank you. Not because you wrote it, but because you somehow knew exactly what I needed to hear. There are days here when everything feels overwhelming. Some clinics have only a handful of nurses caring for entire communities. Some families travel for hours just to receive basic medical treatment. I've seen courage in places where comfort barely exists. It's changing me. Sometimes I wonder whether you'd recognize me if you met me for the first time today. Then, I remember something you once told me. You hoped we'd both return as different people. I think we're keeping that promise. You asked if I'm laughing. I am. More than I expected. You asked if I'm sleeping enough. I'm not. So, congratulations on knowing me far too well. The journal you gave me is almost half full now. Every page reminds me that even if memories fade, growth doesn't have to. Please thank Mr. Alvarez for saving our table. Tell Jasmine she's impossible not to worry about. And tell Mrs. Donnelly that I fully expect one of her casseroles the day I come home. Take care of yourself, too. I know you don't always remember to. Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't fully believe in myself. Your friend, Zariah. She signed the letter. Then she stared at the final two words. Your friend. Months ago, writing those words would have felt like a loss. Now, they felt honest. And honesty had become more important than pretending. She sealed the envelope before she could second-guess herself. The following morning, life returned to its familiar rhythm. An emergency call came just after sunrise. A passenger bus had slid off a rain-soaked road nearly 40 miles away. Several people were injured. Within minutes, Zariah and the emergency response team were on their way. When they arrived, organized chaos surrounded them. Local volunteers carried supplies through thick mud. Parents searched frantically for children. Paramedics treated patients beneath temporary tents. There weren't enough hands. There never were. Zariah immediately stepped into action. Leah, take triage. Joseph, stay with the children. We need a treatment area under those trees. Her instructions remained calm, clear, steady. No shouting, no panic, only purpose. Hours passed before the final patient was safely transported. As the exhausted team packed away equipment, Leah approached her. I wasn't afraid today. Zariah smiled. You were still brave. No. Leah shook her head. I was confident. You believed I could do it. Zariah looked across the muddy field where volunteers were helping one another load supplies. Leadership. Confidence. Dr. Hassan had been right. People didn't become stronger because someone took control. They became stronger because someone believed they already had strength within them. Nearly a year had passed since she had boarded the flight from Denver. One evening, Dr. Hassan called the entire team together. I have news. Everyone gathered inside the training room. The director smiled broadly. Our emergency response program has now trained more than 500 local nurses. Applause filled the room. Dr. Hassan continued. And because of the remarkable success of this initiative. She turned towards Zariah. The International Board would like to offer you a permanent leadership position. The room erupted into applause again. Zariah stood frozen. A permanent position. Not 18 months. Years. Perhaps even the rest of her career. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. Yet, instead of excitement, her thoughts traveled 6,000 miles away. To a small cafe with a window table. To Jasmine's laughter. To Mrs. Donnelly's casseroles. To a quiet man who once loved her enough to let her go. She looked down at the letter still tucked safely inside her journal. For the first time in many months, home no longer felt like a place she had left behind. It felt like a decision waiting for her. The offer remained unanswered for 6 days. Every morning, the envelope from the International Medical Alliance sat neatly on Zariah's desk. Every evening, she left it exactly where it was. A permanent leadership position. competitive salary, the opportunity to expand emergency medical training across multiple countries. It was the kind of career people spent decades hoping for. Dr. Hassan never pressured her. "You'll know when you're ready," she said one afternoon, while they reviewed training schedules. "I wish I believed that." "You will." Dr. Hassan smiled knowingly. The hardest decisions usually aren't difficult because we don't know the answer. They're difficult because every answer asks us to sacrifice something. Zoraya understood exactly what she meant. Accepting the position meant staying. Declining it meant leaving behind work she deeply loved. Neither option felt like a mistake. That was what made the choice so painful. The calendar quietly moved forward. 15 months had passed since she arrived. The frightened woman who had stepped off the airplane carrying broken memories was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, more confident, more patient. She no longer questioned every decision she made. She trusted herself again. One afternoon, Leah walked into the training center carrying a folder. "I've been offered a supervisory role." Zoraya looked up with a smile. "Congratulations. I almost turned it down." "Why?" Leah looked embarrassed. "I didn't think I was ready." Zoraya laughed softly. "I've heard those exact words before." "You have?" "From the woman sitting in your chair." Leah smiled. "What changed?" Zoraya leaned back thoughtfully. "I realized confidence doesn't arrive before responsibility. It grows because of it." Leah nodded slowly. "I'll remember that." As the younger nurse left the office, Zoraya couldn't help smiling. Without realizing it, she had become the mentor others relied on. Exactly as her grandmother had once hoped. That evening, rain fell steadily across the compound. The sound against the roof reminded her unexpectedly of rainy afternoons in Denver. She opened the leather journal Grayson had given her. The pages were almost full. There were stories about children whose lives had been saved, notes from leadership workshops, sketches of mountains and villages, pressed flowers collected during long walks, and tucked inside the front cover, Grayson's first letter. Its edges had softened from being read so many times. She smiled as she unfolded it once again. Halfway through the second page, her satellite phone rang. Very few people had that number. She answered immediately. "Hello? Z?" "Jasmine." Her voice sounded different, quieter. "Jasmine? How are you?" "I'm good." A pause. "How are you?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Something happened." Zoraya's heartbeat quickened. "What is it?" "It's Grayson." Every muscle in her body tensed. "What happened? Is he okay?" "He's alive." Relief washed over her for only a second. Because Jasmine's silence said there was more. "He collapsed during a board meeting 3 days ago." Zoraya stood so quickly that her chair tipped backward. "What?" "They rushed him to the hospital." "What was wrong?" "The doctors say it wasn't his heart. It was exhaustion. He'd been ignoring severe migraines for months. He was barely sleeping. He kept working." Zoraya closed her eyes. She remembered the promise he had made before she left. "I'll try to take care of myself." Jasmine had corrected him. "No, you'll actually do it." Apparently, he hadn't. "Why didn't anyone tell me sooner?" "He wouldn't let us." "What?" "He made us promise. He said you were doing important work. He didn't want you distracted." Tears immediately filled Zoraya's eyes. Even now, even lying in a hospital bed, he had still been protecting her dream. The following morning, Dr. Hassan found Zoraya sitting alone outside before sunrise. "You didn't sleep?" "No." She handed over her untouched cup of coffee. Dr. Hassan sat beside her. "You received bad news. It's someone back home." She explained everything. The collapse, the months of exhaustion, the phone call. When she finished, silence settled between them. Finally, Dr. Hassan spoke. "You love him." Zoraya looked toward the horizon. "I don't know." "Yes." The older woman smiled gently. "You do. You simply don't know what kind of love it has become." Those words struck her deeply. Because they were true. The desperate uncertainty she had felt after waking without memories had disappeared long ago. What remained was quieter, steadier, built not on forgotten moments, but on everything they had chosen after the accident. Trust, respect, friendship, admiration. Perhaps love wasn't always lightning. Sometimes it was sunrise, slowly illuminating everything that had been there all along. 3 days later, Zoraya stood outside the small regional hospital where Grayson had once encouraged her to follow her dreams. Children laughed nearby. Patients waited patiently beneath shaded trees. Life continued, as it always did. Dr. Hassan joined her on the front steps. "Have you made your decision?" Zoraya looked down at the permanent contract in her hands. Then she looked at the nearly full journal. Finally, she looked toward the busy clinic where hundreds of local nurses were now teaching others what she had taught them. The mission would continue. It no longer depended on one person. She smiled through quiet tears. I came here to help build something that could survive without me. Doctor, Hassan nodded. And you did. Zoraya took a slow, steady breath. Then, with complete certainty for the first time in many months, she signed the document. Not the contract offering her a permanent position, the document declining it. She handed it back to Dr. Hassan. I'm going home. Dr. Hassan embraced her warmly. You were always going to. Zoraya frowned. You knew? The older woman laughed softly. No. I simply knew that home is rarely the place where we're most comfortable. It's the place where we're most needed. As preparations for her departure quietly began, Zoraya slipped Grayson's letter back inside the journal. This time, when she looked at the words, I'm proud of you, always, she realized something that made her heart beat just a little faster. For months, she had been reading those words as encouragement from a friend. Now, for the very first time, she read them as words from the man she was slowly, deliberately, and completely falling in love with, all over again. The news of Zoraya's departure spread quickly through the medical compound. Doctors who had become colleagues gathered to congratulate her. Nurses she had mentored stopped by her office with handwritten notes. Several former students traveled for hours from neighboring villages simply to thank her one last time. She accepted every hug with gratitude. Yet each goodbye reminded her of a lesson she hadn't fully understood before coming here. A meaningful life wasn't measured by how many places you visited. It was measured by the lives that continued to grow after you left. On her final afternoon, the training hall filled far beyond capacity. Rows of chairs stretched from one end of the room to the other. Many of the people standing before her had once doubted they were capable of leading emergency response teams. Now they were instructors themselves. They were teaching others, exactly as she had hoped. Dr. Hassan stepped onto the stage first. I've introduced many remarkable people over the years, she began, but very few have changed this organization from the inside out. She smiled towards Zoraya. When she arrived, she believed she had come here to recover from a broken past. The audience listened quietly. What she didn't realize was that she would also help hundreds of others build a stronger future. Applause filled the hall. Long, warm, sincere. Zoraya walked slowly to the podium. For a moment, she simply looked around the room. Faces from different countries, different languages, different backgrounds, yet every one of them had shared the same purpose: saving lives. She smiled. I spent a long time believing I had lost the most important part of myself. The room became perfectly still. When I lost my memories, I thought I had lost my identity. She paused. I was wrong. She looked toward Leah in the front row. Our memories tell us where we've been. They do not decide who we choose to become. Several people nodded quietly. I came here searching for pieces of my old life. She placed one hand over her heart. I found something even more valuable. The confidence to build a new one. A tear slipped down Leah's cheek. Others quietly wiped away their own. If I've taught you anything, Zoraya continued, I hope it isn't just how to respond during emergencies. I hope I've shown you that leadership begins with compassion. That courage grows through service. And that every patient deserves to feel seen before they are treated. When she stepped away from the podium, the entire room rose to its feet. Not because she was leaving, because she had given them something they intended to carry long after she was gone. That evening, Dr. Hassan handed her a small wrapped package. A farewell gift. You didn't have to. I know. Zoraya carefully unwrapped it. Inside rested a beautifully carved wooden compass. Simple, elegant. On the back, a single sentence had been engraved. The heart always remembers the way home. Emotion tightened her throat. It's beautiful. Dr. Hassan smiled. You arrived here looking for direction. She gently closed Zoraya's fingers around the compass. I don't think you'll need this to find your way. But I hope it reminds you that purpose isn't a destination. It's something you carry wherever you go. Zoraya embraced her tightly. I'll never forget you. Dr. Hassan laughed softly. Good. I'd hate to compete with your memory twice. They both laughed through tears. The journey home felt different from the journey that had brought her here 18 months earlier. The first flight had been filled with uncertainty. This one carried quiet confidence. She no longer questioned who she was. She knew she was a nurse, a teacher, a granddaughter shaped by wisdom, a friend, and perhaps a woman who had fallen in love twice with the same man. The thought made her smile as she looked out the airplane window. Clouds drifted beneath the wings like endless fields of white. She opened the leather journal one final time. Only a single blank page remained. She picked up her pen. Final entry. 18 months ago, I believed this journey would help me remember who I used to be. Instead, it taught me to appreciate the woman I am becoming. If memories are gifts from yesterday, then choices are gifts we give tomorrow. I'm finally going home. She closed the journal. For the first time since waking in Grayson's mansion without recognizing him, she no longer feared the future. Meanwhile, back in Denver, autumn had quietly settled across the city. Golden leaves lined the sidewalks outside Willow and Bean. The familiar cafe remained as welcoming as ever. Mr. Alvarez was arranging pastries behind the counter when Grayson walked in. The usual? The older man asked. Grayson smiled. Please. He took his seat beside the window. The same table, the one that had remained unofficially reserved for nearly 2 years. Mr. Alvarez carried over a cup of coffee. You know. The older man glanced at the empty chair across from him. I keep expecting her to walk through that door. Grayson followed his gaze. So do I. You hear from her? Sometimes. And? Grayson smiled faintly. She sounds happy. That's a good thing. It is. Yet beneath the smile rested a quiet ache. He missed her. Not with desperation, not with bitterness. Simply with the steady absence that only someone deeply loved could leave behind. He reached into his briefcase and removed a folder. Inside was paperwork reducing his role as CEO. Months earlier, after his collapse, he had begun restructuring the company. More responsibilities had been delegated. Executives were encouraged to take mandatory vacations. Mental health support had expanded across every office. He had finally started living the balance Zariah had once encouraged. Success no longer came before health or people. He signed the final page. As he placed the pen down, his phone buzzed. A text message from Jasmine. Where are you? He replied. Willow and Bean. Why? 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally, her message arrived. Stay exactly where you are. Don't leave. He frowned. Is everything okay? No reply. Mr. Alvarez noticed the puzzled expression. Problem? I don't know. Before Grayson could say another word, the small bell above the cafe door chimed. He glanced up automatically. The autumn sunlight spilled through the entrance. A traveler stood just inside the doorway. Dark curls, slightly longer than before. A navy coat over simple jeans. A leather backpack slung over one shoulder. In one hand, a worn journal. In the other, a small wooden compass. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The cafe around them seemed to disappear. No conversations, no clinking cups, no music, only silence. Zariah's eyes found his. She smiled, not uncertainly, not politely, but with quiet certainty, the kind that comes from someone who has traveled halfway around the world, only to realize that the place they truly wanted to be had been waiting for them all along. Grayson slowly stood. Neither of them spoke. Some reunions were too important for words, and this one had been 18 months in the making. For several long seconds, neither of them moved. The cafe continued around them. Coffee machines hissed. Customers chatted quietly. A child laughed somewhere near the front window. Yet for Grayson and Zariah, the rest of the world seemed to fade into the background. Grayson searched her face, as though trying to convince himself she was really standing there. She looked different. Her hair was a little longer. The African sun had left a warm glow on her skin. There were faint lines of confidence around her eyes that hadn't been there 18 months earlier. She carried herself differently too. Straighter, calmer, as though somewhere along her journey she had stopped asking permission to become herself. And Zariah saw changes in him as well. The exhaustion Jasmine had described was gone. The dark circles beneath his eyes had faded. His shoulders no longer carried the constant tension of a man trying to carry the weight of an entire company alone. He looked healthier, more peaceful, more present. For the first time, she realized something remarkable. While she had been rebuilding herself on another continent, he had been rebuilding himself at home. Neither had waited for the other to become whole. They had done the work separately. Now they stood before each other as two stronger people than the ones who had said goodbye at the airport. Grayson finally smiled. You came home. His voice was quiet, almost disbelieving. I did. Neither of them rushed forward. Neither felt the need to. Some reunions weren't measured by how tightly two people embraced. They were measured by the peace they brought into the room. Mr. Alvarez watched from behind the counter, wisely pretending to organize pastries that had already been arranged twice. He smiled to himself. Some tables, he thought, really were worth saving. Grayson stepped toward her. "Can I?" He gestured toward the backpack on her shoulder. "Of course." She handed it to him. As he lifted it, he laughed softly. "It's heavier than I expected. It contains 18 months. He looked at her curiously. "My journal. My sketchbook. A carved wooden compass. And approximately 400 pages of lessons I never expected to learn." He smiled. "I'd like to hear every one of them." "You might regret saying that." "I doubt it." Mr. Alvarez finally approached, unable to hide his grin any longer. "I was beginning to think I'd have to reserve this table forever." Zariah laughed. "You kept your promise? I've owned this cafe for 38 years. He placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of her. "I've learned promises are easier to keep than regrets." She looked at the steaming mug. "You remembered?" He shrugged playfully. "I remember everyone's order." Grayson coughed. "That's not true." Mr. Alvarez looked at him over his glasses. "You still ask for oat milk, and then forget you don't actually like it." Zariah laughed so hard, she nearly spilled her coffee. Grayson raised his hands in surrender. "I have no defense." The laughter broke the last of the tension between them. For the first time since she had walked through the door, they simply felt normal. Hours passed without either of them noticing. She told him about the villages hidden between mountains, about children who ran alongside the medical trucks each morning, about Leah, who had become one of the strongest instructors in the program. She described the long days, the impossible challenges, and the countless small victories that rarely made headlines but changed lives forever. Grayson listened without interrupting. He asked thoughtful questions. He wanted details, not summaries. He wanted to understand the life she had built. When she finished, she looked at him. "What about you?" He smiled. "I finally listened to you. I wasn't here. You didn't have to be." He told her about stepping back from day-to-day operations, about promoting younger executives, about creating new employee wellness programs after his collapse, about spending weekends volunteering at the clinic again. "And?" He hesitated. "I started teaching." She blinked. "You?" He laughed. "I know. What do you teach?" "Leadership." She stared at him in pleasant surprise. "The funny thing is," he looked down at his coffee, "I spend half the class repeating lessons I learned from a trauma nurse." She smiled. "I hope you at least give her credit." "I do. I simply tell everyone she once threatened to shave my head." She covered her face with her hands. "I can't believe that story survived." "It will survive forever." Late in the afternoon, they left the cafe and wandered slowly through downtown Denver. Autumn leaves drifted across the sidewalks. Street musicians played soft melodies on the corners. The city felt familiar to both of them, though in different ways. Without realizing it, they found themselves walking toward the park, where they had once volunteered together. The benches were still there. The playground still echoed with children's laughter. The community garden they had helped build had flourished. Vegetables and flowers now filled the once empty plots. An elderly volunteer recognized them immediately. "Well, would you look at that?" Mrs. Garcia wiped dirt from her gardening gloves. "My favorite volunteers are finally together again." Zariah smiled. "We're still figuring things out." Mrs. Garcia chuckled. "Aren't we all?" She handed Zariah a small packet of sunflower seeds. "You planted these before your accident." "I did?" "You said sunflowers always face the light." She smiled knowingly. "And, somehow, I think you still do." As they continued walking, Zariah slipped the packet of seeds into her pocket. She noticed Grayson watching her. "What?" "You've changed." "I know." "No." He smiled gently. "I mean, you've become even more yourself." Those words settled quietly between them. No compliment had ever meant more. Because after everything she had lost, being recognized for who she had become felt infinitely more valuable than being remembered for who she had been. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of amber and rose, they stopped on a small bridge overlooking the river. Neither spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was comfortable, patient, the kind of silence shared by two people who no longer felt the need to fill every moment with words. Finally, Zariah rested both hands on the bridge railing. "I thought coming home would answer all my questions." Grayson looked toward the water. "Did it?" She smiled thoughtfully. "No. It gave me better ones." He turned toward her. "What kind?" She met his eyes. "The kind I'm finally ready to explore." For the first time since she had awakened without her memories, the future no longer frightened her. It invited her. The river reflected the colors of the setting sun like liquid gold. For several minutes, neither Zariah nor Grayson spoke. The gentle rush of water beneath the bridge filled the silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like both of them understood that some conversations deserved patience. Rushing them would only diminish their meaning. Finally, Zariah broke the silence. "When I first woke up in your house..." She looked out across the river instead of at him. "I was terrified." Grayson nodded. "I know. I thought you were lying." "I know. I thought everyone was lying." "I know." She laughed softly through the emotion. "You keep saying that." He smiled. "Because I never blamed you." She turned to face him. "Not even once?" He shook his head. "How could I?" "You woke up in a stranger's house wearing a wedding ring you didn't remember." "I would have been terrified too." His answer loosened something inside her. For months, she had carried quiet guilt over the fear and suspicion she had shown him. Yet, he had never treated her as though she had failed him. He had only seen a frightened woman trying to make sense of an impossible situation. "I owe you an apology." "No." "I do." "You don't." She frowned. "Why not?" "Because you apologized every time you chose to trust me." She blinked. "What?" He smiled gently. "Every coffee. Every phone call. Every conversation. Every step you took toward me was worth far more than any apology." Tears filled her eyes. No one had ever described forgiveness so beautifully. The evening grew cooler. A light breeze stirred the trees along the riverbank. Zariah slipped her hands into the pockets of her coat. "I've been thinking about something." "What is it?" "My memories." He waited. "I used to believe getting them back was the only way forward." She looked at him. "But now..." "I'm not so sure." He remained silent, allowing her to continue. "I've spent almost 2 years chasing the woman I used to be." She smiled sadly. "And somewhere along the way, I became someone new." She laughed quietly. "I don't think the old Zariah would have had the courage to move halfway around the world. I don't think she would have believed she could train hundreds of nurses. I don't think she understood herself the way I do now." She took a slow breath. "If my memories returned tomorrow, I'd be grateful. But if they never do..." She placed one hand over her heart. "I think I'll still be okay." Grayson felt emotion rise in his chest. For the first time since the accident, she wasn't speaking like someone searching for what had been taken from her. She was speaking like someone grateful for what life had given her. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. She smiled. "I know." Those 2 words carried an entirely different meaning now. The streetlights flickered on, one by one. They began walking again, slowly, without deciding where they were going. Eventually, they found themselves standing outside the old apartment building where Zariah had lived before their marriage. She looked up at the familiar windows. "You kept paying the rent." "I did." "Why?" Grayson slipped his hands into his coat pockets. "I wasn't sure what you'd need. I thought..." He smiled faintly. "If you ever wanted a place that belonged only to you, you should have one." She stared at him. "You never expected me to move back into the mansion." "I hoped. But hope and expectation aren't the same thing." She laughed softly. "You've become very wise." "I've had excellent teachers." She rolled her eyes playfully. "If you say that one more time..." "What?" "I'm going to start charging tuition." They both laughed. The sound echoed gently through the quiet street. A few moments later, they climbed the apartment stairs together. The apartment looked almost exactly as it had 18 months earlier. The books remained neatly arranged. The paintings still hung on the walls. Even the small plant beside the window had somehow survived. She looked at it suspiciously. "You've been watering this." Grayson tried to appear innocent. "I might have hired someone." "You hired someone to water my plant?" "It seemed important." She shook her head, laughing. "You're unbelievable." She wandered slowly through each room. There was no sadness anymore. No frustration, only gratitude. This apartment had protected a part of her life until she was ready to return. She stopped before a photograph hanging near the hallway. It showed the 2 of them covered in paint, laughing during the community center renovation. She had seen it before. But this time, something happened. Not a full memory, not a dramatic flashback, just a feeling. Warmth, safety, joy. It lasted only a heartbeat before fading away. She touched the edge of the frame. "I still don't remember that day." Grayson stepped beside her. "You don't have to." She looked at him. "I believe it happened. And that's enough." She smiled. "I think it is." Later that evening, they sat on the apartment balcony, watching the city lights. The same place where she had once decided to leave for Africa. So much had changed since then. She reached into her backpack and removed the carved wooden compass Dr. Hassan had given her. Then she placed it beside Grayson's leather journal. 2 gifts, from 2 chapters of her life. Both had guided her home. She looked at him. I've been carrying around a question for months. When I lost my memories. You lost your wife. He nodded quietly. I did. She swallowed hard. And yet, you never asked me to become her again. He looked toward the city lights. Because she doesn't exist anymore. Her breath caught. The woman I married shaped the woman sitting beside me. He turned to meet her eyes. But they're not exactly the same person. And that's okay. His voice was calm. I didn't fall in love with you because of one particular version of you. I loved the way you kept growing. So why would I expect that to stop? A tear slipped down her cheek. He reached into his pocket and handed her a clean handkerchief. She laughed. You still carry these? I've learned they're useful around you. She smiled through tears. So? She drew a slow, steady breath. I have one more question. Anything. She held his gaze. If we had never met before today. If there had been no wedding. No photographs. No history. She paused. Would you still fall in love with me? Grayson didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied the woman before him. The woman who had crossed an ocean to save strangers. The woman who had rebuilt herself without losing her kindness. The woman who still believed people deserved compassion before judgment. Finally, he smiled. No. She blinked in surprise. He stepped a little closer. I wouldn't fall in love with you. Her heart sank for a fraction of a second. Then he continued. I already am. Every single day. With the woman standing in front of me. Not the woman from before the accident. Not the memories they had lost. The woman she had become. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She laughed through them. That's the most unfair answer I've ever heard. I know. She shook her head, smiling. You really are impossible. So I've been told. For a long moment, they simply stood there. Then, without fear, without uncertainty, without needing yesterday to give them permission, Zariah reached for his hand. This time, it wasn't because she was searching for answers. It was because she had finally found one. She intertwined her fingers with his. Warm, certain, intentional. I can't promise that my memories will ever return, she whispered. I don't need them to. I know. She looked into his eyes. But I can promise you something. What? A smile slowly spread across her face. I'm ready to see where tomorrow takes us. Grayson smiled back. So am I. And beneath a sky filled with stars, the two of them stood, hand in hand. Not because of the vows they had spoken years before, but because, at long last, they had chosen each other again. The next morning, Denver woke beneath a crisp autumn sky. Golden sunlight spilled across the city, catching the last of the colorful leaves before winter arrived. For the first time in nearly 2 years, Zariah woke without feeling as though she was searching for something she had lost. She wasn't suddenly healed. Her memories hadn't miraculously returned overnight. There were still photographs she couldn't explain. Stories she couldn't remember. Entire seasons of her life that remained hidden behind a closed door. But for the first time, that door no longer controlled her happiness. She had stopped measuring her life by what was missing. Instead, she had begun appreciating everything that was present. Her phone buzzed just after 8. Jasmine, breakfast, my apartment, 9 o'clock. Don't be late. Zariah smiled. Some things truly never changed. When she arrived, the familiar smell of pancakes drifted through the apartment before Jasmine even opened the door. There she is. Jasmine wrapped her in a hug. Welcome home. It's good to be back. You look different. So I've been told. No. Jasmine stepped back to study her. You look lighter. Zariah thought about that. I think I am. The table was already set. Fresh fruit, coffee, pancakes, and enough food for at least 6 people. Mrs. Donnelly emerged from the kitchen carrying another serving plate. I refuse to let humanitarian workers return home hungry. Zariah laughed. I missed you. I know. The older woman smiled proudly. I've been freezing casseroles in preparation. Jasmine groaned dramatically. My freezer has been held hostage for weeks. The apartment filled with laughter. For the first time, the stories they shared didn't revolve around what Zariah couldn't remember. Instead, she found herself telling stories from Africa. About Leah's first emergency response. About children who had insisted on teaching her songs in 3 different languages. About communities that celebrated every new nurse who graduated from the training program. She spoke with animation, with confidence, with joy. Jasmine noticed. You've changed. I hope that's a compliment. It's the highest one I can give. Later that afternoon, Zariah walked to the neighborhood clinic. She hadn't planned to stay long. She only wanted to say hello. The moment she stepped through the doors, familiar faces looked up. Then came the smiles. One by one, nurses abandoned paperwork. Doctors stepped out of examination rooms. Receptionists hurried around the front desk. Within seconds, she found herself surrounded by hugs. You're really back. We've missed you. You look amazing. Someone handed her a visitor's badge before realizing she still had one clipped to her bag from years earlier. Laughter spread through the hallway. The clinic director, Dr. Reynolds, eventually rescued her from the growing crowd. I was beginning to think we'd never get you back. It's good to see everyone. He led her into his office. I've been waiting until you had time to settle in. He opened a folder resting on his desk. We have a proposal. She smiled cautiously. Should I be nervous? I hope not. He slid the papers across the desk. The clinic had received funding to create a new emergency training and community outreach program. They wanted someone to lead it. Someone with experience in trauma care. Someone who understood education. Someone capable of building partnerships with underserved communities. In short, they wanted her. Zariah looked up. I just got home. I know. Take all the time you need. We're simply letting you know the opportunity is here. She left the office carrying the folder but made no promises. Life had taught her not to confuse gratitude with obligation. Just because an opportunity existed didn't mean she had to answer immediately. That evening, Grayson invited her to dinner. Not at the mansion. Not at an expensive restaurant. Instead, he suggested they cook together. I'm warning you now, he said, as she tied an apron around her waist. I've improved. We'll see. He raised an eyebrow. That little faith? You once burned soup. It was very ambitious soup. It was tomato soup. It fought back. She laughed so hard she nearly dropped the wooden spoon. The kitchen slowly filled with conversation. They chopped vegetables, argued over the correct amount of garlic, accidentally added too much pepper. Started over. Somewhere between the laughter and the flowers scattered across the countertop, Zariah realized something. These were the moments she had imagined marriage would be made of. Not expensive vacations, not glamorous parties, not perfect photographs. Just two people learning, laughing, and occasionally ruining dinner together. As the pasta finally simmered, Grayson looked at her. I've been thinking. She smiled. Should I be worried? Probably. She laughed. What is it? He leaned against the counter. I don't want to assume anything. She appreciated the way he began almost every important conversation. With respect. I know. But... He took a slow breath. I also don't want us to spend the rest of our lives pretending we're still strangers. She nodded. I don't want that either. He hesitated. What would you think about? He searched for the right words. Dating? She blinked. We're married. I know. He smiled sheepishly. But we've never had a first date. At least, not one you remember. She stared at him for a moment. Then she laughed. You are seriously asking your own wife on a first date? I am. That's either incredibly romantic or unbelievably strange. I'm hoping for romantic. She smiled. So am I. For the first time since the accident, the future no longer felt like something they had to repair. It felt like something they were finally free to create. Saturday arrived with a kind of clear blue sky that seemed determined to brighten every corner of the city. Zariah stood in front of her bedroom mirror, smiling at her own reflection. It felt strangely exciting. She had been on countless dates before the accident. At least, everyone assured her she had. Yet this one felt entirely new. Because it was. She wasn't going on a date with the husband everyone remembered. She was going on a date with the man she had come to know through patience, respect, kindness, and 18 months of unwavering support. She chose a simple emerald green dress, comfortable shoes, and the silver necklace her grandmother had given her years before. Nothing extravagant. She wanted to feel like herself. When the doorbell rang, she took one deep breath before opening it. Grayson stood there, holding a single sunflower. Not an expensive bouquet, just one bright yellow sunflower. She smiled immediately. You remembered. I hoped you still liked them. She accepted the flower carefully. I do. They always face the light. He grinned. I was paying attention. Instead of driving toward downtown, Grayson headed toward the edge of the city. You still aren't going to tell me where we're going? No. I don't like surprises. That's interesting. Why? According to Jasmine, you once planned my birthday party without telling me anything. She laughed. I don't remember that. I know, but apparently you were excellent at keeping secrets. 20 minutes later, he parked beside a familiar building. The community center. The same one they had helped renovate years before. Children's laughter echoed from inside. Music drifted through the open windows. A colorful banner stretched across the entrance. Annual Community Family Day. Zariah looked at him in surprise. This is our date? He nodded. You once told me that if two people couldn't enjoy ordinary places together, they'd struggle to enjoy extraordinary ones. She smiled. I said that? You apparently had a lot of opinions. I still do. I've noticed. They laughed as they walked inside. The community center buzzed with life. Children painted pumpkins. Teenagers organized games. Local musicians played cheerful folk songs. Families filled long picnic tables with homemade food. Mrs. Garcia spotted them almost immediately. I knew you'd come. She hurried over and hugged them both. Then she looked from Grayson to Zariah with an expression that made them laugh. You two finally stopped making life so complicated. We're trying, Zariah admitted. Mrs. Garcia nodded approvingly. Good. It wastes too much time. Before either of them could reply, a little girl tugged on Zariah's sleeve. Miss Zariah? She looked down. The child couldn't have been older than 8. We need another judge. For what? The pumpkin decorating contest. The little girl grabbed her hand before she could answer. You have to help. Zariah looked back at Grayson. Permission to abandon my date? He laughed. Only if I can come too. For the next hour, they wandered from table to table judging crooked pumpkins, handmade scarecrows, and enthusiastic works of art covered in far too much glitter. Every child insisted their creation deserved first place. Every parent secretly agreed. When the winners were announced, the children cheered for one another almost as loudly as they celebrated themselves. As they walked away, Grayson smiled. You have glitter in your hair. So do you. I blame you. I blame the 6-year-old with unlimited craft supplies. Later that afternoon, they found themselves sitting beneath a large oak tree, sharing slices of homemade apple pie. A group of teenagers played basketball nearby. Several elderly couples danced slowly to live music. Life unfolded around them in all its beautiful simplicity. This is nice, Zariah said quietly. It is. She looked at him. You know, I expected dating a billionaire to involve helicopters. I considered one. You did not. I absolutely did. She laughed. What changed your mind? He shrugged. I remembered something. What? You once told me the best dates cost attention. Not money. She smiled. I really was wise. You really were. She raised an eyebrow. Were? He corrected himself immediately. Ah. They laughed again. As the afternoon drew to a close, Mrs. Garcia approached carrying an old photo album. I found these while cleaning the storage room. She handed it to Zariah. The cover was faded with age. Inside were photographs documenting years of community projects. Near the middle of the album, Zariah found a picture of herself and Grayson kneeling beside a flower bed. Both were covered in dirt. Both were laughing. The image stirred something inside her, not a memory, more like an echo. She closed her eyes. For one fleeting second, she heard laughter, felt warm sunshine on her face, smelled fresh soil after spring rain. Then it vanished. She opened her eyes again. Grayson watched her carefully. You felt something. She nodded slowly. I don't know what. You don't have to explain. She looked back at the photograph. No, I don't. This time, the disappearing feeling didn't frustrate her. Instead, it reassured her. Perhaps memories weren't gone forever. Perhaps they simply arrived in their own time. As sunset painted the sky in soft shades of orange and lavender, Grayson walked her home. They stopped outside her apartment building. Neither seemed eager to end the evening. I had a wonderful time, she admitted. So did I. She smiled mischievously. I think you earned a second date. He placed one hand dramatically over his heart. What an honor. I know. She laughed. I'll try not to let it go to my head. Just as she reached for the apartment door, her phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number. She almost ignored it. Instead, she answered, Hello? A professional voice greeted her. Ms. Carter? Yes. My name is Dr. Michael Lawson from Denver Memorial Neurological Institute. Her smile faded. We've reviewed the latest scans your physician requested. She felt her heartbeat quicken. Is something wrong? There isn't anything wrong. The doctor paused. But we believe we've identified a new treatment option. She glanced toward Grayson. He immediately recognized the concern on her face. What kind of treatment? She asked quietly. It's experimental. There are no guarantees. But... The doctor's voice became more measured. There is a real possibility that it could restore a significant portion of your lost memories. The world seemed to fall silent. The laughter from the street, the distant traffic, even the wind. Everything disappeared beneath the weight of those words. After nearly 2 years, the impossible had suddenly become possible. She ended the call several minutes later, her thoughts racing. Grayson searched her face. What happened? She swallowed hard. They think... Her voice trembled. They think they might be able to bring my memories back. Neither of them spoke, because, beneath the hope, lurked a question they had never imagined they would have to face. If Zoraya remembered the woman she used to be, would she still choose the life and the love she had built since losing her memories? For the second time in her life, Zoraya found herself sitting in a neurologist's office. The room looked almost identical to the one she remembered from 2 years earlier. Soft grey walls, framed landscapes, a bookshelf filled with medical journals. Only one thing was different: the woman sitting in the chair. The first time she had entered a neurologist's office, she had been frightened, broken, desperate for answers. This time, she walked in with steady shoulders and a peaceful heart. She wasn't searching for an identity anymore. She already knew who she was. Dr. Michael Lawson greeted her warmly. I'm glad you came. So am I. Grayson sat quietly beside her. He had offered to wait outside. She had been the one to ask him to stay. Not because she needed someone to speak for her, but because, after everything they had been through, she wanted him beside her. Dr. Lawson reviewed her scans carefully before folding his hands on the desk. I've read your entire medical history. I also spoke with your previous neurologist. Zoraya nodded. What exactly have you found? The scar tissue from your injury has continued to heal. He pointed to several images on the screen. We've also learned much more about memory recovery over the past 2 years. He paused. We believe you may be a candidate for an experimental treatment. May? There are still uncertainties. What kind of treatment? A combination of targeted neurostimulation and intensive memory rehabilitation. He spoke calmly, making sure every word was clear. Our goal wouldn't be to create memories. It would be to help your brain access memories that may already exist but remain difficult to retrieve. Zoraya listened carefully. What are the chances? We can't promise success. He answered honestly. Some patients recover only fragments. Others remember much more. And some experience no significant change. She appreciated his honesty. What are the risks? Dr. Lawson didn't hesitate. Memory recovery can be emotionally overwhelming. He continued gently. Sometimes old memories return alongside painful emotions. Guilt, fear, grief. In rare cases, patients struggle to reconcile who they were with who they've become. Those words lingered in the room, because they described her greatest fear. Exactly. She wasn't afraid of remembering. She was afraid of losing the peace she had fought so hard to build. The drive home was unusually quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. Grayson kept both hands on the steering wheel. He didn't interrupt her thoughts. When they reached her apartment building, she finally spoke. What would you do? He glanced at her. If it were you? He smiled gently. I don't think that's the right question. She sighed. I knew you'd say something like that. He laughed softly. The right question is, hey, what do you want? She looked out the window. I don't know. Then you don't have to decide today. She turned toward him. Aren't you curious? About what? Whether I'll remember our wedding. Our honeymoon. The first time we said, I love you. His expression softened. Of course I am. He reached over and took her hand. But my curiosity isn't more important than your peace. Those words settled deep inside her. Even now, he refused to put his hopes above her well-being. That evening, Zoraya walked alone through the neighborhood park. The same park where children still chased one another across the grass. The same park where she and Grayson had once volunteered. She sat on a familiar bench and watched the sunset. Her thoughts drifted to the people who had shaped her journey. Her grandmother, Jasmine, Dr. Hassan, Leah, Mr. Alvarez, Mrs. Donnelly. Every one of them had taught her something different, yet all their lessons pointed toward the same truth. A meaningful life wasn't built by clinging to yesterday. It was built by choosing how to live today. She reached into her bag and removed 2 objects. The leather journal Grayson had given her, the carved wooden compass from Dr. Hassan. One represented the life she had built after losing her memories. The other reminded her that the heart always remembered the way home. She smiled. Perhaps home had never been a place. Perhaps it had always been the person she was becoming. The following afternoon, Jasmine stopped by with lunch. "I brought soup." Zariah laughed. "Everyone brings soup when life gets complicated. It's a universal rule." They settled onto the couch. After listening to everything the neurologist had explained, Jasmine remained thoughtful for several moments. Finally she asked, "Can I tell you something without influencing your decision?" "You can try." "When you first lost your memories." Jasmine looked down at her bowl. "I spent months praying you'd become the old Zariah again." She looked back up. "I don't pray for that anymore." Zariah frowned. "You don't?" Jasmine smiled through tears. "No, because the woman sitting in front of me today is someone I'm incredibly proud to know." Emotion filled the room. "I miss pieces of who you were," Jasmine admitted, "but I've fallen in love with who you've become." She reached across the table and squeezed Zariah's hand. "So whatever you decide. Please don't decide because everyone else misses the past. Decide because it feels right for you." Those words lifted an invisible weight from Zariah's shoulders. For so long she had carried the responsibility of becoming the person everyone remembered. Now she realized something. No one who truly loved her expected that anymore. They simply wanted her to be happy. That night, after everyone had gone home, she opened the final page of Grayson's journal. There was only enough room for one last entry. She picked up her pen. Then she stopped. For several minutes, she stared at the blank page. Finally, she wrote a single sentence. "Tomorrow, I won't choose between my past and my future. I'll choose the life that allows both to exist with peace." She closed the journal. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall over Denver. Tomorrow would bring the biggest decision of her life. But tonight, for the first time since the accident, she wasn't afraid of whichever answer awaited her. Snow blanketed Denver overnight, turning rooftops and sidewalks into a quiet landscape of white. The city seemed to move more slowly, as though even time understood that some mornings deserved reverence. Zariah stood by her apartment window with a mug of coffee warming her hands. The neurologist's folder rested on the table behind her. One signature. That was all it would take to begin the experimental treatment. She had imagined this moment countless times during the first months after her accident. Back then, she would have signed without reading a single page. She would have done anything to recover the missing years. Now, the decision was no longer simple. Not because she feared remembering. Because she had learned that healing and remembering were not always the same thing. A soft knock came at the door. Grayson. He stepped inside carrying a paper bag from the neighborhood bakery. "I brought cinnamon rolls." She smiled. "Bribery? I prefer to call it emotional support." She laughed, and the tension in the room eased. They ate breakfast at the small kitchen table, talking about everything except the decision waiting between them. They discussed the first snowfall, a new family that had moved into Mrs. Garcia's neighborhood, and Jasmine's latest attempt to convince everyone to join her weekly trivia nights. It felt wonderfully ordinary. When they finished eating, Grayson carefully folded the empty paper bag. "I need to tell you something." She looked up. "If you decide not to do the treatment, I'll be at peace. And if you decide to do it, I'll still be at peace." She searched his face. "You really mean that?" "I do." "What if your wife comes back?" He smiled gently. "My wife is already here." She felt tears gathering. "I may remember different things tomorrow." "You might. I may even see you differently." "You might. And that doesn't scare you?" He reached across the table and took her hand. "It would scare me if our love depended only on memories." He paused. "But it doesn't. It depends on the choices we've made since." His words settled into her heart like the first light after a long night. Later that morning, they returned to the Neurological Institute. Dr. Lawson greeted them in his office. "Have you reached a decision?" Zariah nodded. "I have." She looked at the treatment consent form one last time. Then, she gently pushed it back across the desk. "I'm not ready." The doctor didn't appear surprised. "You've decided against treatment?" "For now." She chose her words carefully. "I've spent 2 years learning that my life isn't incomplete because some memories are missing. I've built relationships. I've found purpose. I've fallen in love." She glanced at Grayson and smiled. Twice. A quiet smile crossed the doctor's face. "I understand," she continued. "If one day my memories return naturally, I'll welcome them. But I don't want to chase the past so intensely that I stop living the present." "Doctor." Lawson nodded with genuine respect. "That is a thoughtful decision. There is no deadline. If you ever change your mind, my door will remain open." As they left the office, Zariah felt something she hadn't expected. Relief. Not because she had rejected hope, but because she had stopped allowing hope to become pressure. Weeks passed. Winter settled fully over Denver. Life slowly found its rhythm again. Zariah accepted the leadership role at the neighborhood clinic, where she combined emergency medicine with community outreach and training. The lessons she had learned in East Africa shaped every class she taught. Young nurses admired not only her skill, but also the compassion with which she treated every patient and every colleague. Grayson continued mentoring young entrepreneurs and gradually expanded the charitable foundation he had started after stepping back from daily corporate leadership. Together, they launched scholarships for nursing students who wanted to serve underserved communities, ensuring that opportunity reached people who might otherwise never receive it. Their calendars grew busy. Their evenings remained simple. Sometimes they cooked together. Sometimes they walked through the neighborhood after dinner. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, each reading a different book while sharing the same couch. They continued dating. Every Friday, no matter how busy life became. They called it protecting their first date. Spring arrived quietly. The city awakened beneath blooming trees and longer days. One Saturday morning, Mrs. Garcia invited everyone from the community center to help plant a new memorial garden. Children dug holes that were far too large. Adults laughed as they tried to keep everything organized. Grayson knelt beside a flower bed, brushing soil from his hands. "Need another shovel?" he asked. Zariah looked at him. At that exact moment, the scent of fresh earth rose in the warm air. A child laughed nearby. Somewhere, wind chimes sang softly. Without warning, a memory surfaced. Not a feeling, not an echo, a memory. She saw herself years earlier, kneeling in the very same garden beside Grayson. He had accidentally splashed mud across both of them. She had laughed until her stomach hurt. He had apologized at least 5 times. She had kissed his cheek just to stop him from apologizing. The memory lasted only seconds. Then it faded. She stood perfectly still. Grayson noticed immediately. "What is it?" Tears filled her eyes. "You got mud all over my favorite jeans." He blinked. "What?" "You wouldn't stop apologizing." His face slowly changed. "You remember?" She laughed through tears. "You were impossible. And I kissed you just so you'd finally stop saying you were sorry." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Grayson smiled. Not with triumph, not with relief, but with quiet gratitude. "You remembered?" "A little." She touched her temple. "It wasn't everything. It doesn't have to be." She realized he meant that. He wasn't asking for more. That evening, they returned to the bridge overlooking the river, the place where they had chosen each other again months earlier. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. Grayson reached into his coat pocket. "I've been carrying something." He opened a small velvet box. Inside was her wedding ring, the one she had removed after waking in his mansion, unable to remember the man who had placed it on her finger. "I kept it safe," he said quietly. "I never wanted to pressure you." He held the box toward her. "I'm not asking because we were married. I'm asking because we've fallen in love again." His voice trembled ever so slightly. "Zariah Carter." He smiled. "Will you marry me?" She laughed through tears. "Again? Again." She looked at the ring. Then, at the man who had waited without demanding, loved without controlling, and trusted without conditions. She held out her hand. "Yes. This time. I'm saying yes to the man I know today." He slid the ring gently onto her finger. It fit exactly as it always had, but it meant something entirely new. Around them, the river continued its quiet journey. The city lights flickered on. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang the hour. They kissed, not because the past had finally returned, but because the future had finally arrived. 1 year later, the memorial garden flourished. The clinic's outreach program had expanded into neighboring counties. The scholarship fund supported dozens of nursing students. Jasmine finally won trivia night. Mrs. Donnelly still believed every problem could be improved with homemade pie. Mr. Alvarez's sketch of Grayson building furniture hung framed in the clinic lobby beneath a small brass plaque. The strongest foundations are built with quiet acts of love. On a warm summer afternoon, Zariah stood before a new class of emergency nurses. She smiled as she welcomed them. "People often think medicine is about having all the answers." She shook her head gently. "It isn't. It's about showing up with compassion, even when the answers aren't clear." After the class ended, she walked outside to find Grayson waiting beneath a blooming tree. He reached for her hand. She intertwined her fingers with his without hesitation. Some memories had returned. Many never did. But she no longer counted what was missing. because she had learned the greatest truth of all. A life is not measured by how perfectly we remember yesterday. It is measured by the love, courage, and kindness we choose today. And, in the end, her heart had remembered the most important thing. Not the day she first fell in love, but the man she would choose, again and again, for the rest of her life. Before you go, we'd love to hear from you. If you were in Zariah's position, would you have chosen the experimental treatment to recover your memories? Or would you have embraced the new life you had built? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every one of them, and your perspective could inspire someone else. If Grayson and Zariah's journey touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable love story. And remember, the strongest relationships aren't built on perfect memories. They're built on love, trust, forgiveness, and the choice to keep choosing each other every single day. Thank you for spending this journey with us. We'll see you in the next story.